The Edge of the World, a historical epic set in the Age of Discovery. The year was 1493, and the Atlantic had begun whispering its secrets to men who believed themselves gods. In the ports of Lisbon, sails billowed like ghosts, pale and endless against the dawn, and the smell of salt mixed with sweat and gunpowder. Ships left the harbors not merely for trade, but for eternity. Among them was a small carrack named Santa Lucia, its timbers creaking with the ambition of an empire. Its captain, Duarte Vares, was not a famous man, not yet. He was the second son of a bankrupt noble, born into a world that valued titles more than truth. Duarte had spent his youth fighting Moorish raiders along the Algarve coast, but his heart had always belonged to the sea. "There are no kingdoms upon the ocean," he once told his brother, "only horizons that move." When he received a sealed letter bearing the crest of King Juan II, he knew his life was about to be divided into before and after. The letter spoke of a voyage westward, beyond the charts of Ptolemy, beyond the dying edges of human imagination. Rumors had spread that a Genoese sailor named Columbus had already crossed the Atlantic under the Spanish flag. Portugal could not be left behind. Duarte's orders were simple and impossible. Sail west, find lands not yet claimed by Spain, bring back proof, gold, spice, or souls. He gathered a crew of 97 men, convicts, dreamers, deserters, priests, and thieves. Among them was a young cartographer named Isabella Corte Real, a woman disguised as her dead brother. She had forged her identity papers, believing that maps were not made by men alone. Her hair was cropped short, her voice roughened with salt. Only Duarte suspected the truth, though he said nothing. The Santa Lucia departed Lisbon under a shroud of incense and prayer. Bells tolled, mothers wept, the sea waited. For weeks they sailed through tempests that tore sails like paper. Men whispered that the ocean itself resisted the intrusion of mortals. "We are crossing into God's shadow," said Father Esteban, their ship's confessor. But Duarte pressed on, trusting the stars more than Scripture. Then one night, as the moon bled red above the horizon, the sea began to glow. Creatures unseen flickered beneath the surface, casting eerie light across the hull. The sailors fell to their knees, muttering Ave Marias. Isabella, her ink-stained hands trembling, scribbled in her journal. "Perhaps the world does not end in darkness, but in light we cannot understand." Weeks turned to months. Rations dwindled. Scurvy took 6 men. The carpenter died when a mast fell during a storm. The crew began to murmur the forbidden word, mutiny. Duarte faced them on the quarterdeck. "You think I don't fear death? I do. But what I fear more is that we die having discovered nothing." His voice cracked the night like lightning, and somehow the sea obeyed. On the 94th day, a lookout cried, "Land!" They saw it then, a dark green coastline rising from the mist, alive with birds. Palms swayed in the wind, and rivers shimmered like veins of glass. It was not the Indies. It was something else. They named it Terra Lucida, the shining land. The inhabitants watched from the trees, silent as the wind. They were tall, bronze-skinned, their bodies painted with ochre and ash. Duarte stepped ashore holding a cross in one hand and a sword in the other. He smiled as if he had found heaven itself. Isabella, standing behind him, whispered, "Heaven has never looked so fragile." They stayed for weeks, mapping the coast, exchanging gifts with the local tribe whose leader called himself Tepanaru. He spoke through gesture and firelight, his words carried in rhythm rather than reason. They offered fruit, fish, and stories of a great serpent who sleeps beneath the sea. Duarte, ever pragmatic, dismissed them as superstition. But one night, a storm, unlike any they had seen, tore through the bay. Lightning struck the shore, waves rose higher than cathedrals. The Santa Lucia was thrown against the rocks. When dawn came, half the crew was gone, and with them every ounce of gold they had taken from Tepanaru's people. Isabella survived. Duarte did too, though his leg was shattered. Tepanaru found him and said through gestures, "You came for treasure." The sea took payment. They stayed among the tribe for a season. Duarte learned their words. Isabella recorded their constellations, different from those of Europe, yet eerily familiar. She realized the people of Terra Lucida had mapped the stars long before any European scholar. Then came the Spanish. A fleet under Captain Rodrigo Valverde, flying the red and gold cross of Castile, arrived like a storm. Duarte's discovery had not remained secret. Portugal's spies had been betrayed, and Spain claimed the New World as its own. The massacre began at dawn. Tepanaru's village burned. Isabella was captured. Duarte, limping and bleeding, watched from the hills as the men he'd once called brothers slaughtered the innocent in the name of Christ and crown. When the Spanish finally left, Duarte buried his compass in the sand and carved a single sentence into a rock, overlooking the bay. The world is round, but men are hollow. Isabella, taken back to Spain in chains, was later tried by the Inquisition for heresy, for being both a woman and a witness. Her journals were confiscated, sealed within the archives of Seville. Centuries later, a fragment of her writing was rediscovered. We sailed beyond the edges of our maps and found not monsters, but mirrors. The year was 1521. 28 years had passed since the Santa Lucia vanished beyond the Atlantic, taking with it its captain, its crew, and the whispers of a land that glowed beneath foreign stars. The official records said the voyage never happened. The Portuguese crown, pressured by Spain and the papal bulls that divided the world in half, erased all mention of it. But history has its own memory, quieter, older, more stubborn than kings. In Seville, a scholar named Tomás de Viedma worked in the Royal House of Trade, the Casa de Contratación, where every map, logbook, and sea chart of the Spanish Empire was kept under lock and oath. Tomás was a thin man, prematurely gray, his fingers stained with ink and gilt. He had once been a cartographer for Magellan himself, but after the great circumnavigator's death in the Philippines, Tomás returned to Spain, haunted by questions. He had seen things, coastlines that appeared on no Spanish charts, islands that should not exist. One winter night, as he was sorting through a chest of confiscated materials marked heretical female authorship, he found something extraordinary. A weathered journal, its cover cracked, its ink fading, but still legible. The name on the first page stunned him. Isabella Corte Real. The entries were uneven, written in a scholar's hand, but in Portuguese, not Spanish. They spoke of a voyage aboard the Santa Lucia, of a captain named Duarte Alvarez, and of a new land called Terra Lucida. But what arrested Tomás's breath were the maps, detailed drawings of an entire coastline unknown to any chart of the Spanish Empire. The shape was unmistakable, the southeastern edge of what would later be called North America. Tomás lit a candle, spread the fragile parchment on his desk, and whispered, "If this is real, then we were not the first." He copied the map in secret, tracing every inlet and mountain ridge. But secrets in Seville had a way of growing teeth. Within days, the Inquisition came knocking. The journal, they claimed, was heretical, written by a woman, by a liar, by someone condemned decades earlier. The original was burned. Tomás fled. He took with him only the copied map and a coded fragment of Isabella's final entry. The true empire is not of land, but of memory. For months he wandered, crossing through Portugal in disguise, seeking any sailor who might confirm the Santa Lucia's voyage. In the taverns of Lagos and the monasteries of Coimbra, he heard pieces of stories. An old sailor who swore he'd seen a ship shattered on reefs beyond the sunrise. A priest who remembered a confession from a dying captain named Duarte. Then came the final proof. At the convent of São Vicente, a blind monk handed him a box of polished driftwood wrapped in oilcloth. Inside was a brass compass, its glass cracked, its needle still trembling faintly toward the west. On the back, engraved so faintly it could only be read by candlelight, "The world is round, but men are hollow." He wept. He knew then that the story was true. But truth, in the age of empires, was the most dangerous treasure of all. He crossed the ocean the next year aboard a fleet bound for Hispaniola, officially as a royal surveyor, unofficially as a thief of history. The crossing was brutal. Scurvy ate through half the crew. Storms ripped open their sails. Yet every night, Tomás stared at the western horizon, imagining the lost shore of Terra Lucida. When they reached the Caribbean, he began asking questions. Most laughed at him. Some cursed him. But an old Taino fisherman finally spoke. He had heard of a land far to the north, where the sea shines beneath the moon, and no one returns. Tomás persuaded 3 men, deserters mostly, to join him in secret. They stole a small caravel from a sugar port and sailed north, guided only by Isabella's surviving map. Weeks passed, food dwindled, but then, one misty morning, they saw it. The same coastline Isabella had drawn 30 years earlier. Palms, rivers, dunes of white sand, birds wheeled overhead. They had found Terra Lucida. They anchored in a shallow bay. The beach was empty, eerily so. There were signs of habitation, fire pits, carvings, broken pottery, but no people. The air smelled of rain and smoke, as if the land itself still remembered fire. Inland, Tomás found something even stranger. Half buried beneath vines and roots stood a stone marker, not native, but European, weathered by time, barely legible, but still clear enough to read the inscription. "The world is round, but men are hollow." He fell to his knees. It was Duarte's stone, the final message of a man the world had tried to erase. And beside it, in the soil, something glinted, a fragment of metal. He dug it free, a medallion, etched with the crest of Portugal, and on the back, a woman's name scratched by hand, Isabella. He stared at it for hours, unable to move. The jungle hummed around him, alive with unseen things. When he returned to the beach, his men were gone. Their footprints led toward the forest, and then vanished. That night, as he sat by the dying fire, he heard chanting from the dark, low, rhythmic, in a language that seemed older than the sea. He raised his musket, trembling, and saw shadows moving among the trees. They came at dawn, not as enemies, but as guardians, the descendants of Tepanaru's people. They did not attack. Instead, an old woman approached him, carrying something wrapped in leaves. She spoke softly in her tongue, then pointed toward the mountains.
Tomas unwrapped the bundle. Inside was a piece of parchment protected by wax. On it, drawn in delicate lines, was a map. Not European, not native, but both. A map of the world. It showed Europe, Africa, Asia, and beyond them, the twin continents of the West. The map was centuries ahead of its time. And at the bottom, written in Portuguese, was a single sentence. We are not discoverers, we are remembered. Tomas realized what he held was impossible. A document linking two worlds before any official discovery, blending knowledge that should never have met. He wanted to bring it back, to show the world, to rewrite history, but he never would. A hurricane struck 3 days later. His ship broke apart. When Spanish sailors found wreckage months later near Cuba, they recovered only a single chest filled with seawater and ruined papers. For the next 300 years, the name Terra Lucida remained nothing more than a rumor, a sailor's ghost story told in ports from Lisbon to Havana. Until in 1820, an American historian named Elias Thornton stumbled upon a Portuguese map fragment at an auction in Boston. It showed a coastline that did not exist on any contemporary chart, a perfect match to the southeastern United States. And on its edge, faded but still visible, 2 words, Terra Lucida. Thornton spent the next decade tracing its origin, uncovering scattered accounts in royal archives, burned letters, forbidden maps. What he pieced together was staggering. Evidence that the first contact between Europe and the Americas may have occurred decades before Columbus, led not by kings or conquistadors, but by a forgotten ship, a hidden woman, and a secret buried by empires. He wrote of it in his final manuscript, The Light Beyond the Sea. It was never published. His home in Salem burned to the ground before the printing. The fire, they said, started from lightning. But in the ashes, one thing survived. A brass compass, its glass cracked, its needle pointing forever west.
The summer of 2024 was the hottest on record in coastal Florida. Hurricanes had torn the Gulf apart for months, washing away whole stretches of shore, unearthing things long forgotten, bones, shipwrecks, even ancient pottery. Dr. Elena Torres, an archaeologist from the University of Virginia, stood knee-deep in brackish water on the edge of St. Augustine Bay, squinting at a shape half buried in the sand. Her team had been called to survey the aftermath of the latest storm. Most expected nothing more than colonial debris, but what she saw now was older, impossibly older. A fragment of carved stone, weathered, but still bearing faint Portuguese script. And beneath the moss, she could just make out a line etched by a trembling hand. The world is round, but men are hollow. She froze. Those words rang in her mind like an echo. She had read them before, in a fringe academic paper published in 1971, written by a forgotten historian named Elias Thornton. His unpublished manuscript, The Light Beyond the Sea, had been dismissed as myth, a romantic fantasy about a pre-Columbian Portuguese voyage to the Americas. But the inscription was real. It was here. Elena called for the excavation crew. Within hours, they had uncovered more. Fragments of a ship's hull, a bronze astrolabe fused with coral, and the shattered remains of a compass, its glass cracked, its needle pointing stubbornly west, even after centuries beneath the sea. The media descended like vultures. Lost Portuguese colony found, blared the headlines. The Smithsonian sent experts. The Portuguese government requested access. But Elena knew, even before the political storm began, that this was bigger than any museum exhibit. In the days that followed, she studied every artifact, tracing symbols and carvings. The language was a blend of archaic Portuguese and Latin. One broken plank bore a faint name, Terra Lucida, the ship that should not have existed. At night, unable to sleep, she read through every available fragment of Thornton's surviving notes. They spoke of a secret map, a hidden land called Terra Lucida, and two figures, a captain and a woman cartographer, whose journal had been burned by the Inquisition. Thornton claimed to have found one surviving page, sealed in wax and oilcloth, describing a coastline of light. No one had believed him. But now, with the evidence in her hands, Elena did. She requested permission to excavate deeper, beyond the shoreline, where satellite scans suggested the remnants of stone foundations, possibly the remains of an early settlement. Her funding request was denied. The area was deemed a protected environmental zone. So she went anyway. On a moonless night, she and her assistant, Marcus Lee, slipped past the cordon and began digging by lantern light. The air was heavy with salt and the hum of cicadas. After hours of work, Marcus's shovel struck something solid, a chest sealed with pitch, its wood blackened by time, but intact. They pried it open. Inside were rolled parchments, preserved miraculously by wax and oilcloth. The smell of old ink and salt filled the air. The first parchment bore a crest, the royal arms of Portugal. The second was a map. It showed Europe and the New World, but with coastlines drawn centuries before official discovery. Rivers, mountains, and settlements no European should have known existed in 1493. And at the bottom, written in a delicate feminine hand, Map of the Shining Land, drawn by Isabella Corte Real. Elena's breath caught. She felt history shifting beneath her feet. But before she could take photos or notes, she heard voices, not from Marcus, but from the darkness behind them. Two men in black suits stepped into the lantern light. No insignia, no badges. One of them said quietly, "You shouldn't be here." The chest was confiscated. Elena and Marcus were escorted off the site. The next morning, the excavation zone was sealed entirely, for safety reasons. 3 days later, her research funding was withdrawn. Her university email was deactivated. When she tried to retrieve her field notes from the campus lab, the archives had been emptied. Someone didn't want Terra Lucida to exist. But Elena wasn't done. She still had the photos she had taken before the men arrived, high-resolution images of the map and the inscription, and buried in Thornton's old writings was a clue he'd left hidden in plain sight. The true archive lies beneath the floor of St. Mary's Chapel, Salem. She booked a flight to Massachusetts. Salem in November was gray and wind-torn, its streets smelling faintly of wood smoke and rain. The chapel stood at the edge of town, a crumbling stone church, long abandoned. Inside, beneath cracked, stained glass, she found what she was looking for, a loose flagstone near the altar. Beneath it, wrapped in oilcloth, lay a wooden box. Inside were two things, a faded notebook and a brass compass. The notebook was written in English, Thornton's handwriting. The final pages told the rest of his story. I was warned by men who claimed to serve the crown of Portugal. They said the discovery would unmake history. But I have seen the evidence. Terra Lucida is real, and they will burn this truth again, as they have before. The last entry ended abruptly. The next page was half burned, but one line survived. If the compass still points west, the light remains. Elena lifted the compass. Its glass was cracked, its needle trembled.
and when she turned it slowly, it swung not toward magnetic north, but toward the sea. She knew then what she had to do. A month later, on board a small research vessel funded anonymously through a private donor, she followed the compass's pull along the Gulf Stream. For days it led her nowhere, only open water and fog. Then, one dawn, the fog parted. An island rose from the mist, lush, uncharted, glowing faintly in the morning light. The instruments went dead, GPS failed, the compass spun wildly, and then stilled. They landed on a white beach. The sand shimmered as if dusted with glass. Inland ruins rose, not Spanish, not native, but a fusion of both. Columns carved with suns and crosses, scripts in Portuguese and strange symbols intertwined. And there, at the center, stood a weathered stone, bearing words almost lost to erosion. We are not discoverers, we are remembered. Elena fell to her knees. The air shimmered, and for a moment, just a heartbeat, she thought she saw figures moving among the trees. A woman with ink-stained hands, a man with a broken leg gazing at the horizon. Then the wind shifted, and they were gone. She whispered into the silence, "Isabella, Duarte, I found it." The official report of Elena Torres's disappearance was filed 2 weeks later. Her vessel was found adrift near the Florida Keys, its equipment intact, but her crew missing. Only one item remained on the deck, a brass compass, its needle pointing forever west. Epilogue. In 2025, a young student cataloging maritime artifacts at the Smithsonian found an unlabeled crate. Inside were a waterlogged map, fragments of a Portuguese astrolabe, and a sealed envelope addressed simply to "The Light Beyond the Sea." When she opened it, she found a single page written in an elegant looping script. History does not belong to empires. It belongs to the wind, the tide, and those who remember. At the bottom, a name signed in ink faded but legible. Isabella Corte Real.
3 weeks after Dr. Elena Torres's disappearance, a photograph appeared on an obscure maritime history forum. It showed part of a parchment spread across a workbench, a coastline drawn in archaic ink, marked Terra Lucida. Within 12 hours, the post vanished, the user deleted, and the forum itself went offline, but not before the image was copied by a graduate student in Lisbon, by a sailor in Recife, by an anonymous archivist in Washington. The copies multiplied like spores. By the time governments noticed, the map was everywhere and nowhere, hidden on encrypted drives, embedded in memes, printed on coffee mugs in underground cafes. The world had rediscovered a myth. At the National Archives in Washington, D.C., analyst David Klein received a classified transfer labeled Historical Containment. Inside was a folder of black and white photos, the same map, the same compass, and a transcript of Elena's field notes, heavily redacted. David had spent 10 years cataloging declassified World War II intercepts. He knew bureaucratic paranoia when he saw it, but this file felt different. Every page carried the seal of the Atlantic Commission, a committee that officially did not exist. He took the file home. That night, he could not stop reading. Elena's notes were precise: coordinates, artifact descriptions, linguistic parallels between 16th century Portuguese and native dialects along the Gulf Coast. Each entry ended with the same refrain: "They are trying to erase the light." At 2 a.m., his phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "You have something that belongs to us. Meet at the Library of Congress, Lower Archives, tomorrow, 9 p.m. He didn't sleep. The library's basement smelled of dust and marble. A woman waited there, middle-aged, calm, wearing the badge of the Smithsonian Underwater Antiquities Division. She introduced herself only as Dr. Mira Hahn. "I knew Elena," she said quietly. "We worked together before she disappeared." She placed a small device on the table, a portable projector. A holographic image flickered to life, the Terra Lucida map in full color. "Her photos," she said. "We recovered them from a hidden server. She wanted this seen." David leaned closer. Faint notations glimmered in the margins. Numbers, coordinates, Latin phrases. One line translated roughly to "Archive beneath the First Empire." "Archive of what?" he asked. "Knowledge and proof that the first global maps were not made by empire, but stolen from those who came before." She looked around the empty corridor. "The Atlantic Commission has suppressed these findings for 5 centuries. They control what history is allowed to remember." David frowned. "A secret organization that old can't still exist." She smiled without humor. "Then why are there seals on your classified file?" Over the following weeks, David and Mira followed the clues embedded in the map. The coordinates pointed not to the Florida coast, but to the mid-Atlantic, an area known among sailors as the Glass Sea, where sonar failed and compasses spun. They assembled a team under the guise of a climate data expedition, chartered a vessel, and set sail. As they crossed into the coordinates, the ocean shifted color, a luminous green beneath moonlight. Instruments blinked out. The air grew silent, dense, as if the sea held its breath. Then the sonar registered shapes, geometric, symmetrical, far below the waves. Ruins. They launched drones. Stone terraces, columns, and arches sprawled across the seabed. Architecture unmistakably Iberian in design, overgrown with coral, but intact. One structure, larger than the rest, bore a carved sigil, a cross entwined with a sunburst, identical to the symbol Isabella Corte Real's original sketches. When the first images reached the surface, Mira whispered. She called it the archive. They dove the next day. Inside the submerged hall, they found shelves carved from stone, filled with sealed clay cylinders. Most disintegrated on touch, but one survived. Within it lay a thin sheet of beaten gold, engraved with minuscule writing, Portuguese interlaced with another language no one recognized. At the bottom, a sentence in Latin, Lux non inventoret, memorator. Light is not discovered, it is remembered. Before they could retrieve more, a shadow passed overhead. Another ship, unmarked, engine silent. Within minutes, armed divers descended. Mira shoved the gold sheet into David's suit pouch. Get it to the surface, she said. If they find it, history dies again. She never followed him up. Back on deck, David barely made it aboard before the explosion tore through the lower decks. The unknown vessel vanished into fog, leaving the sea boiling with fire and oil. He radioed for help. No one responded. Hours later, a Coast Guard cutter found him drifting amid wreckage, clutching the waterproof case containing the golden plate. 2 days later, he woke in a hospital room in Norfolk. The case was gone. Officials claimed he had been hallucinating from exposure. His story was sealed under national security orders. But someone had seen the footage from their underwater drones. The raw feed, 30 seconds showing the carved halls beneath the Atlantic, had already leaked to the web before the servers were shut down. Millions watched. Within hours, news outlets ran headlines. Atlantis? Lost Portuguese outpost? Government cover-up? Hashtags flared. Politicians denied. The Atlantic Commission released a single statement. No credible evidence supports the existence of such a site.
Yet around the world, archaeologists and historians began re-examining suppressed archives, reopening closed files, and whispering the same forbidden name, Terra Lucida. Weeks later, David received a plain envelope with no return address. Inside was a flash drive and a note written in elegant, looping script. They buried the light beneath the sea, but the tide always returns. E.T. The drive contained scans of Elena Torres's recovered photos and one new image taken from deep underwater. It showed Mira Han smiling behind her diving mask, holding up a tablet carved with the same emblem Duarte once wore. Below it, faintly visible in the sand, lay another inscription: "We are remembered."
David Klein knew the moment he saw the flash drive's final image, Mira holding the carved tablet, that he wasn't supposed to be alive. Survivors create complications. Survivors ask questions. Survivors talk. The hospital discharged him with a quiet efficiency that felt less like medical care and more like removal. His clothes were returned, his belongings misplaced, and a man in a Homeland Security windbreaker followed him across the parking lot without bothering to hide it. David kept walking until he reached the street. Then he didn't go home. He didn't use his phone. He didn't signal his credit card. He simply vanished. He slipped into the underground of Norfolk, bus stations, midnight diners, forgotten ports where no one asked questions. He had one goal: get to someone who could verify the gold plate's inscription and prove the ruins were real before the Atlantic Commission erased it all again. He boarded a Greyhound under a false name. By morning he was in Richmond, by noon Washington, D.C. But as he walked through Union Station, he felt the pressure change, a shift in the air, the ancient instinct that tells prey they are being watched. Two men in dark suits flanked the escalators, scanning the crowd. Not police, not FBI, something else. David kept his head down, moving with the rush-hour tide. But then he saw it. One of the men tapped his earpiece and turned directly toward him. They had found him. He broke into a run, through the concourse, past the coffee counters, past families and tourists and commuters who barely noticed as he crashed through the turnstiles and sprinted toward the side exit. Shouts followed, footsteps pounded behind him. He burst onto Massachusetts Avenue just as a black SUV screeched around the corner. He dove behind a delivery truck as the SUV door opened and a figure stepped out. A man with pale eyes and no expression. The type trained to kill and forget it instantly. David ran again. He didn't stop until he reached the one place he knew they would not expect him to go. The Library of Congress. Not the public reading rooms, the old lower archives, where he and Mira met weeks earlier. He swiped a stolen visitor badge, slipped through a side stairwell, and descended into the quiet maze of manuscripts and sealed stacks. The hum of fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Rows of steel shelving stood like soldiers guarding forgotten truths. David ducked into a narrow aisle and pressed his back against the cold wall, forcing himself to breathe slowly. Footsteps echoed somewhere above him. They were in the building. He reached into his jacket and pulled out the flash drive, the only evidence he still had. The golden plate had been confiscated at sea, but the high-resolution scans on this drive included every engraved detail. He had one option left: find someone who could authenticate it, someone who didn't answer to governments or foundations or commissions. There was only one name: Dr. Eleanor Graves, a reclusive linguist who taught at MIT and published papers so infuriating to historians that the Smithsonian once tried to disinvite her from its own conference. Graves specialized in contact anomalies, unexplained overlaps between languages that should never have touched. If anyone could read Isabella's inscriptions, it was her. David slipped out a side door and made it to the street. No cars followed. No shadows moved. He took a taxi to a motel and used the last of his cash to rent a room. He didn't sleep. He boarded the first train to Boston at dawn. When the train glided into South Station, the city was wrapped in coastal fog. David wore a hooded jacket and kept to side streets, making sure no footsteps shadowed his own. Twice he doubled back. Once he rode an elevator to the 10th floor and exited on the 4th. Only when he was satisfied he wasn't followed did he approach Mid's linguistics building, a hulking modern block of glass and steel that reflected the gray sky like a mirror. Eleanor Graves' office was dark. He knocked. Nothing. He pushed the handle gently. Unlocked. Inside he smelled old books in cedar. Shelves sagged beneath manuscripts in Arabic, Nahuatl, Greek, Tupi-Guarani, and dozens more. Maps covered the walls. Not political maps, but linguistic webs connecting continents like constellations. On her desk sat a half-finished cup of tea, and the laptop still glowing. "Dr. Graves," David whispered. "Lock the door," came a voice behind him. He spun around. Eleanor Graves stood in the corner, narrow-faced, silver-haired, watching him like a bird of prey evaluating a wounded animal. "You brought something dangerous," she said. I swallowed. "How did you—" "You're being hunted," she said calmly. "People don't run into my office unless they're terrified or foolish, sometimes both." David handed her the flash drive. She inserted it into her computer without hesitation. The images flickered on screen. Isabella's map, the inscriptions, the underwater ruins. Dr. Graves' eyes narrowed to slits. "Where did you get this?" David told her everything. The expedition, the attack, Mira's disappearance, the commission. Graves listened without interrupting, her fingers drumming lightly on the desk. When he finished, she stood up and walked to the window. "You have no idea what you've stumbled into," she whispered. "This isn't just about a lost voyage. It's about the origin of global maps, the first circumnavigations, the real story of how Europe discovered the world, and who discovered it first. If what you've shown me is real, it means the foundations of 5 centuries of history are fraudulent." She turned back to him. "They won't let this see daylight." "Then help me. Authenticate it. Prove it's real." She hesitated, but only for a moment. "Come with me," she said. "There's someone else who needs to see this." They left through the service entrance and crossed the fog-soaked campus toward a low stone building that looked older than everything around it. Graves unlocked the door and guided him down a narrow stairwell. At the bottom was a vault-like room filled with scanners, manuscripts, and forensic tools. A man sat hunched over a microscope, a Dominican friar, wearing modern clothes beneath his clerical collar. He looked up, blinking behind thick glasses. "This is Brother Miguel Arujo," Graves said. "He has access to Vatican archives you would not believe." The friar frowned. "Eleanor, what are you doing? You know what my superiors—" She cut him off with one gesture. "Look!" She projected the images onto the wall. Brother Miguel stared, his face drained of color. "I've seen these symbols in forbidden manuscripts, documents locked since 1537. The commission seized them centuries ago. I thought they were destroyed." He stepped back, trembling. "Dear God, this is not just a map. It's a record, a testimony. If this is authentic, the crown, the church, the orders, they're wanted buried again. You understand the danger?" David nodded. "That's why we need you." Before the friar could respond, glass shattered upstairs. Footsteps thundered down the stairwell. Graves' eyes widened. "They found us." The lights flickered.
Shadows moved beyond the frosted glass of the vault door. The same pale-eyed man from Union Station stood on the other side, watching through the pane, unmoving, expressionless. Then he raised a suppressed pistol. The first shot shattered the lock. The second sent the door collapsing inward. David, Graves, and the friar scrambled behind the archival cabinets as the intruders poured in, black-clad, efficient, silent. "Take the drive. Burn the room," one of them said. David clenched the flash drive in his fist. If they took it, the truth died again. Then Graves grabbed his shoulder. "This way." She pulled him toward a maintenance hatch leading into the old steam tunnels beneath the campus, dark, narrow, damp. Behind them, flames roared as the vault was set ablaze. They ran. The truth of Terra Lucida survived only as long as the flash drive in David's hand, and now the hunters were behind him, closing in, relentless.
The steam tunnels beneath MIT were a labyrinth of rust-covered pipes and echoing, dripping darkness. David's breath came in sharp, cold bursts as he followed Eleanor Graves deeper into the underground maze. Brother Miguel ran behind them, clutching his rosary with white-knuckled terror. Above them, the muffled thud of boots followed. The hunters had split into teams. They knew the tunnels. They were closing in. "Left," Graves whispered harshly, "then straight, then down the old service shaft." David didn't ask how she knew the path. She'd clearly prepared for this kind of moment long before he arrived. The old linguist moved with surprising speed, ducking under steam valves and stepping over grated floors as if she'd memorized every turn. A metallic clang rang behind them. "Stop!" a voice shouted. "Hands where I can see them!" David didn't stop. A suppressed shot crackled through the tunnel, the sound a soft cough compared to the real violence of the bullet that pinged off the pipe above his head, spraying sparks. Miguel screamed, stumbling. Graves yanked him by the collar and kept moving. "Down here," she hissed, and kicked open a rusted hatch. It screeched on its hinges. A ladder vanished into darkness. "Go," she ordered. David shoved the flash drive into his pocket, grabbed the ladder, and started climbing downward. Halfway down, the ladder jerked violently. Someone was pulling it loose from above. "Hurry!" Miguel cried. David dropped the last 10 feet and landed hard on the cement floor, pain shivering up his legs. Graves came next. Miguel followed just as the ladder ripped free entirely, clattering into the darkness beside them. Shouts echoed above. Lights flashed. The hunters were preparing to descend by rope. Graves pulled David to his feet. "We have 60 seconds, maybe less." "Where are we going?" he gasped. She pointed into a low brick tunnel barely tall enough to crawl. Miguel swallowed. That leads to the Charles River." "Exactly," Graves said. "But we'll drown." "Not if we move." They dropped to their hands and knees and crawled. The water grew deeper with each yard, cold, black, rising. Behind them came the sound of rope sliding. The hunters were coming down fast. "Keep going," Graves urged. The tunnel ahead brightened, a faint oval of pale light. Moonlight flickered on rippling water. "The outlet," Graves said. "We'll have to swim out." David nodded, adrenaline overriding hesitation. Miguel hesitated at the edge, crossing himself quickly before plunging into the water after them. They swam toward the opening just as shouts erupted behind them. A flashlight beam cut through the tunnel. A shot hissed into the water beside David's ear. Then they were out, exploding into the icy Charles River like 3 stones hurled from a catapult. The night air knifed into David's lungs. The city lights shimmered around them. Traffic moved on the bridges above, oblivious. "Swim," Graves gasped. "Under the pier." They kicked hard, water splashing as bullets plunked into the river's surface behind them. But the darkness of the pier swallowed them quickly, and the shooters hesitated, unwilling to chase blindly. Under the wooden beams reeking of algae and old rope, they clung to the slimy support posts, panting. Are they coming?" Miguel whispered. David peeked out. The hunters stood along the riverbank, scanning the water, but the currents had hidden their location. "No," David breathed. "They're searching, but they didn't see where we went." Graves exhaled shakily. "Good. Then we still have a chance." Miguel coughed, shivering. "A chance for what? They'll hunt us anywhere. Why didn't you tell me they would burn the archives?" Graves looked sharply at him. "Because if I had told you the truth, you would never have helped us." Miguel looked like he wanted to argue, but exhaustion crushed him instead. David wrung water from his jacket and retrieved the flash drive, soaked but intact inside its rubber casing. "This is all that's left," he murmured. Graves nodded. "And it's enough. We don't need the original plate, only the information." Miguel squinted. "Information for what?" "To find the other half," she said quietly. David blinked. "Other half?" Graves leaned closer beneath the shadows of the pier. "The archives mentioned a second tablet. Duarque split the record in two. One half stayed with Isabella's survivors. The other half was carried away by the crew that fled north, following the stars." Miguel's eyes widened. "The northern fragment? You think it's real?" "I know it is," Graves whispered. "And if we can reach it before they do, we'll uncover everything. The real map, the routes, the knowledge Terra Lucida preserved." David tightened his grip on the pier beam. "Where is it?" Graves hesitated only a moment. "In the ruins beneath an abandoned Jesuit mission, a place no one cares about anymore, a place Miguel knows extremely well." The friar's face went pale again. "No," he whispered, "not there. The mission is forbidden, sealed since the 1700s, guarded by the order." Graves nodded grimly. "Which is why that's the first place they'll go once they realize your involvement." David stared between the two of them. "Where is it?" he pressed. Miguel closed his eyes. "Northern Maine," he said softly. "Near the Canadian border. The mission of St. Aurelius. If the tablet still exists, it's there." David pulled himself out of the water. "Then we leave tonight." Graves nodded. "Agreed. We need to disappear before they find us." Suddenly, a beam of light swept across the pier. Voices shouted. Flashlights flickered. "They're sweeping the riverbank," David whispered. Miguel gasped. "How did they find us so fast?" Graves' face hardened. "Because we're not the only ones who know about the northern fragment." David's breath caught. "What do you mean?" Graves stared toward the shore, eyes sharpening. "One of us was followed." Miguel recoiled. "You think it was me?" "No," she said quietly. "Not you." She looked directly at David. "You were marked the moment your ship sank. They let you live so they could see where you would lead them." David's blood ran cold. Above them, footsteps echoed across the pier, growing closer. A flashlight beam swept underneath, landing on the water only a few feet away. Miguel clutched David's arm. "What do we do?" he whispered. David steadied himself. "We run," he said. And the moment the footsteps reached the edge of the pier, David, Graves, and Miguel slid quietly into the river's shadow, vanishing just seconds before the hunters leaned over the railing. They headed north, to the woods, to the border, to the mission where the second half of the truth waited. A truth someone was willing to kill the world to bury.
The night swallowed them as they slipped away from the pier, the hunters' flashlights slicing the darkness behind them. 3 shadows drifting north through the sleeping city, soaked, trembling, and carrying one piece of the most dangerous truth on earth. Graves led them through back alleys toward a forgotten industrial district by the river. The roads were cracked, lamps flickered, windows boarded over. Only the distant hum of traffic reminded David they were still in Boston. "We need transport," she whispered. Miguel pointed at a warehouse door. "This place, it belongs to my order. Old storage for relief missions. Sometimes vehicles." Graves frowned. "You should have mentioned this earlier." "I didn't think we'd be hunted by assassins with night vision goggles." Graves eased the door open. The warehouse interior smelled of dust and machine oil. In the corner sat an aging white cargo van with faded Jesuit markings. "Perfect," she murmured. David climbed into the driver's seat and hot-wired it with surprising speed. Graves raised an eyebrow. "Where did you learn that?" "My brother stole cars," David said flatly. "I learned just by watching." She didn't ask more. They rolled out carefully, headlights off until they were several blocks away. When they reached the interstate ramp, Graves nodded. "North, straight to Maine. We stay off the main towns and avoid cameras." David merged onto I-95, heart pounding. Every car behind them felt like a threat. Every exit ramp looked like an ambush. He kept checking the mirrors. 2 hours passed in tense silence, the city lights fading into empty forest and dark highway. Miguel clutched his rosary. "They'll be ahead of us," he said quietly. "The order will warn me I'm missing." Graves glanced back at him. "Explain." "The mission of St. Aurelius is not abandoned, not fully. It's maintained quietly. 2 monks, maybe 3. They don't know the secret they're guarding. They think it's just heritage preservation." "So who knows about the second tablet?" David asked. "A small circle, very small. The archivists of the Radiant Cross." "The same group that seized Isabella's documents?" David asked. Miguel nodded. "They've been burying discoveries for centuries. Explorers, journals, strange artifacts, maps that contradict official history. Anything that suggested a global knowledge network before the age of exploration." David tightened his grip on the wheel. "So they're the ones who killed Mira's team." "Yes," Graves said, "and they're the ones who'll kill us if they find us." The van hummed through the darkness. Trees loomed on either side, tall and silent. Graves leaned forward. "Miguel, tell David what's inside the mission." Miguel exhaled shakily. "Underground chambers, old tunnels, a vault built by the earliest Jesuits. It predates the mission itself. Some say it was built over an even older structure." "Older how?" David asked. Miguel stared at the floor. "Some believe the first Jesuits who reached that region found something left behind by a forgotten people. They built the mission on top to protect it. But the archives I saw hinted they discovered half of Duarte's tablet centuries later and sealed everything." Graves tapped David's shoulder. "Exit here." They turned onto a smaller road, winding into the deep woods. Fog drifted across the asphalt like ghostly ribbons. Then the cell signal died, and the night grew darker. By dawn, they reached a remote fuel station near the New Hampshire border, a small, lonely structure surrounded by pine forest. A single attendant, half asleep, leaned against the counter. David parked far from the cameras. "I'll get supplies," he said. Inside, the store was lit by a flickering fluorescent tube. David grabbed bottled water, protein bars, duct tape, and a road atlas, and a cheap prepaid phone. As he paid, the attendant squinted. "You from around here?" "Just passing through." The man nodded slowly, but his eyes lingered too long on David's soaked clothes and trembling hands. When David left the store, Graves was pacing. "Miguel is gone." David froze. "What?" She pointed at the forest. "He walked behind the restroom 5 minutes ago. He didn't come back." David scanned the tree line. Nothing moved. Then, a muffled shout. David drew a breath and sprinted toward the sound, Graves following. They pushed through branches, mud,
pine needles. Miguel was kneeling in the dirt, hands raised, shaking. A man in a brown monk's habit held a pistol pressed to Miguel's neck. Another monk stood behind him, armed with a compact machine pistol hidden beneath his robes. Both wore the insignia of the Radiant Cross. The first monk spoke softly, almost gently. "Brother Miguel, you should have stayed in the archives. You were never meant to see the map." Miguel sobbed. "Don't do this, please." The monk's expression remained calm. "Where is the drive?" David stepped forward. "Let him go." The monk with the machine pistol turned, startled. He hadn't expected David and Graves to find them so quickly. His finger twitched on the trigger. Graves spoke sharply. "If you kill him, you lose your only guide to the mission's vault. He knows the entrance sequence. Without him, you'll spend days trying to break in, days in which others might arrive." The monks hesitated. The vault. Yes, he would know. "Of course I know," Miguel cried. "I've tended the grounds for years. I know the codes, the mechanisms. Just don't kill me." David stepped closer. "We all want the same thing." The monk raised his eyebrow. "You seek the truth. We seek its preservation." "That's not preservation," David growled. "It's control." The monk's calm eyes flashed with something colder. "History must be guarded from those who would misuse it." "And who guards it from you?" Graves spat. A beat of silence. Then the machines of the forest changed. A low rumble of wheels on gravel. The monk stiffened. A vehicle. Several. Dark SUVs breaking through the fog, rolling toward the gas station. The hunters, the pale-eyed man among them. Graves narrowed her eyes. "We're out of time." The monk holding Miguel made a decision. "Run," he whispered to Miguel. "All of you. We were sent to follow you, not kill you unless necessary. But those are not monks. They serve a different master." He pushed Miguel toward David. "Go. If they find you, everything is lost." Graves grabbed David's arm. "To the van, now." They ran through the trees as the SUVs braked hard, men pouring out, weapons drawn. The monks disappeared in the opposite direction, melting into the shadows. David and the others burst out of the forest and sprinted to the van. "Drive!" Graves screamed. David slammed the accelerator. Gunshots cracked behind them. Glass shattered. The back window exploded. Miguel ducked beneath the seat, sobbing. "They found us again! They found us!" Graves looked back at the convoy chasing them. "No," she said quietly. "They were waiting. Someone tipped them off." David swerved around a logging truck, tires screeching. "You think the monks betrayed us?" "No," Graves said. "I think the monks saved us." "Then who?" She stared at him. "You were marked before you ever reached shore. They've been tracking you with something you're carrying." David's stomach twisted. His jacket, his watch, his boots, his... He slammed a fist against the wheel. "The life vest I was found in. The hospital gave it back with my clothes. I kept the buckle as a reminder." Graves swore. They embedded a locator. David tore the vest buckle from his pocket and threw it out the window. The SUV swerved as the tracker hit the road. Suddenly, the convoy split. Half turned toward the signal, half stayed on David's tail. Graves narrowed her eyes. They know you destroyed the tracker." Miguel looked up, shaking. "What now?" David accelerated toward the wilderness stretching ahead. "Now," he said, eyes locked on the road, "we reach the mission before they do." The forest swallowed the highway as they raced north, and the truth, the other half of the ancient map, was waiting beneath the earth. But the hunters were coming, and they were getting closer.
The van cut through the Maine wilderness like a bullet. Trees blurred into streaks of dark green, the road winding deeper into remote territory where phone signals died and even hunters rarely ventured.
Morning fog clung to the pines like ghostly shrouds. David kept the van at the edge of control, fast but not reckless, weaving along the narrow road that twisted through the hills. Graves sat forward, studying the old paper atlas he'd bought at the gas station. Miguel kept glancing through the shattered back window, flinching at every distant engine noise. "They're close," Miguel whispered. "I can feel it." Graves didn't look up. Feelings are not data. But David knew Miguel was right. Every few minutes, the faint hum of engines came and went, sometimes behind them, sometimes parallel, sometimes too precise to be coincidence. "They're flanking us," David said. "Yes," Graves replied. "They'll try to box us in before we reach the mission." David gritted his teeth. "Then we don't give them the chance." The trees thinned ahead. The road climbed sharply, then curved around a ridge. Beyond it, the land opened, vast forest, broken by a series of glacial lakes reflecting the gray sky. Miguel pointed. "There, that valley. The mission lies inside the largest patch of woodland. No marked roads, only an old logging trail." Graves traced her finger to a faint dotted line on the map. "The trail is here." David took the turn hard, the van bouncing over gravel as they left the pavement and plunged into the forest. Branches scraped the sides like skeletal fingers. Miguel winced. "If the Order still has watchers near the mission, they'll hear us coming," Graves finished. David pressed harder on the gas. "We need to get there before anyone else does." For 30 minutes they followed the narrowing trail deeper and deeper into the wilderness. The canopy grew thicker, the light dimmer. The van jolted violently over roots and rocks. Suddenly, Graves tensed. "Stop." David braked. Graves pointed ahead. "Look." The trail dipped into a clearing, and tire tracks crossed the mud. Fresh ones, very fresh. Miguel clasped his rosary. "They got ahead of us." David stared at the tracks. Wide, deep, heavy SUV weight. "How many vehicles?" he asked. Graves crouched, examining the impressions. 2, maybe 3, less than an hour old. David shut his eyes. The hunters had anticipated us. Miguel trembled. "We should turn back, find police, or rangers, or—" "There's no time," Graves said. "And no law enforcement in Maine is prepared to fight these people." David climbed back into the van. "If they reach the mission first, they'll secure the perimeter." Graves slid into her seat. "Yes, which means we must enter through the tunnels." Miguel swallowed hard. "The tunnels, they're unstable, flooded in places, pitch black." "So are our chances," David said. "Get in." The van pushed on. The forest grew unnaturally silent. No bird song, no wind, just the low growl of the engine and the distant pulse of danger. When they crested the final ridge, the mission of St. Aurelius finally appeared through the fog, a crumbling stone building surrounded by tall grass and encircled by trees. Its steeple leaned to one side, the old wooden shingles rotting away. But even in ruin, the place radiated an eeriness that tightened David's chest. "Looks abandoned," he said. Graves shook her head. "It never is." David parked the van behind a fallen tree. They approached on foot, moving silently through the underbrush. The air smelled of moss and ancient damp. Miguel motioned for them to crouch. "There," he whispered. A faint shimmer of black fabric. Movement between trees. 2 men with rifles sweeping the perimeter silently and methodically. The hunters were here. Graves' voice dropped to a breath. "They haven't entered the vault yet. They're securing the surface first." Miguel nodded weakly. "Then there's still a chance." David turned to him. "Where are the tunnels?" Miguel pointed toward a small stone well near the mission's side. Its wooden cover was cracked and overgrown with vines. Beneath that well, the earth sank into shadow. "The old drainage shaft," he whispered. "It leads to the cellar, then to the vault, if the door's still open." Graves placed her hand on David's arm. "We must be silent. They'll hear anything." David nodded. The three of them crept through the grass, keeping low, using the fallen stones and bushes for cover. The hunters' voices drifted through the trees, calm, professional, patient. They reached the well. Miguel lifted the rotten cover with trembling hands. The hinges snapped. A cold gust rose from below, carrying the scent of stone and centuries of silence. A metal ladder descended into darkness. David climbed first. The narrow shaft swallowed him. The only sound was dripping water and his own heartbeat. Graves came next. Miguel followed, replacing the cover as best he could. At the bottom, they entered a low stone chamber, lit only by David's small flashlight. Moss grew along the walls. Wooden crates rotted in corners. A doorway led into the cellar. Graves whispered, "This way." They moved through the underground corridors, stone arches, thick dust, old religious carvings fading into decay. Miguel paused by a heavy wooden door. "This is it," he said, "the vault of Aurelius." The door was engraved with Latin text barely visible beneath centuries of grime. "Domus Lucis Occulta," House of the Hidden Light. David felt a chill. Miguel knelt beside the door and pressed his fingers into the old carving. A faint click echoed, then another. The door trembled. Graves leaned close. "The mechanism still works." Miguel pushed a final stone and whispered a prayer. With a deep, grinding sigh, the vault door shifted inward, revealing a descending staircase spiraling into the earth. A cold, ancient breath exhaled from below. David lifted the flashlight. Stone walls covered in symbols, dust swirling like mist, a darkness so deep it seemed alive. Graves stepped forward. This is where they hid it, the northern fragment. But before they could descend another step, a voice rang out behind them. "Don't move." They turned slowly. At the top of the cellar stairs stood the pale-eyed man, his weapon aimed directly at David's chest. Behind him, three more hunters spread out, silent, efficient. Miguel dropped to his knees. "Please." The pale-eyed man cut him off. "You led us well," he said calmly. "All of you. Now step aside." Graves moved in front of David. "No," she said. The man sighed. "Then you die first." He raised the gun, and the vault lights flickered. A sound rose from below, a rumble, a pulse, a vibration through the stone. The hunters hesitated. The pale-eyed man frowned. What was that? Miguel's voice cracked. "It's waking up." David felt the air shift, pressure, tension, something ancient stirring in the depths. Then the rumble rose into a low, resonant hum that shook dust from the ceiling. The pale-eyed man took one step back. "What is down there?" Miguel whispered, "Not what, who?" And the vault answered with another tremor, deeper, older, alive. David tightened his fists. "The truth."
The hum rose again, deeper this time, vibrating through the stone floor like the heartbeat of something immense far below. Dust drifted from the arched ceiling, and the pale-eyed man steadied himself against the wall, eyes narrowing in calculation rather than fear. "Stay back," he ordered, voice taut. David didn't budge, neither did Graves. Miguel, still kneeling, crossed himself with shaking hands. A faint glow seeped up from the spiral staircase, a cold bluish-white shimmer that pulsed in slow, rhythmic waves. It illuminated the first few steps of the vault like moonlight on deep water. Graves whispered, "That's impossible. The power source should be dead." The pale-eyed man took one more step toward the stairs, gun raised. "What activated it?" he demanded. Miguel swallowed. "You did. All of you did. The vault is designed to detect conflict. The original architects believe truth is revealed only under threat." The pale-eyed man's lip curled. Superstitious nonsense. But his eyes didn't leave the glowing stairwell. Another pulse rose from the depths, stronger, brighter. This time the stone floor trembled visibly. David shifted his weight. "Whatever's happening down there, we don't want it waking up while you're pointing guns at us." The pale-eyed man replied without looking at him, "Your desires are irrelevant." Graves' voice hardened. "If you kill us, you lose your interpreters. None of your men can read the fragments." For the first time, the pale-eyed man hesitated. A faint crack sounded overhead. A small stone fell from the ceiling and shattered on the floor. One of the hunters stepped forward anxiously. "Sir!" "He hold your position," the pale-eyed man snapped. But he was sweating now. The tremors were increasing. The glow from below grew brighter, casting long, rippling reflections along the cellar walls like underwater light. Miguel's breath came fast and shallow. "It's responding to the presence of the fragment bearer." David looked at him sharply. "What does that mean?" Miguel didn't answer. He was staring at David's hands, specifically his right one. The pale-eyed man noticed too. "Interesting," he murmured. "The vault recognizes him." David recoiled. "Recognize me? I've never seen this place in my life." Miguel whispered, "You touched the tablet in Peru. The fragment keyed itself to you. That mark isn't invisible to this place." David glanced at his palm. It looked normal. No marks, no burns, no scars. "What mark?" Miguel shook his head. "Not physical. Resonant. The kind they embedded in caretakers centuries ago. The vault senses loyalty, intention, lineage of contact." The pale-eyed man cut him off. "Then he goes down first." He motioned toward David with his gun. Graves stepped between them. "Not happening." The hunter to the left raised his rifle. Graves froze. Another pulse surged upward, this one strong enough to shake the walls. A deep metallic groan echoed from the staircase, as if giant deers were turning far below. Miguel's breath came fast and shallow. "It's fully awake. We must descend now, all of us, or it will seal again for centuries." The pale-eyed man's expression flickered. A calculation, a risk assessment, a decision forming. He lowered his gun by an inch. "Fine. We go together, slowly." David glared at him. "If you shoot even once down there, this whole place could collapse." The pale-eyed man smiled thinly. "Then let's hope I don't have to." He gestured. "Move." David started down the stairs first, reluctantly, muscles tight, the cold light bathing his face. Graves followed right behind, Miguel clutching his rosary like a lifeline. The pale-eyed man descended next, flanked by two hunters. The last hunter stayed at the door, weapon trained on the staircase. "Sir, I hold the exit." "No, inside, now." The hunter hesitated. But then, a sound cut through the cellar like a whisper of steel. Something shifted on the far side of the underground chamber. A shadow, a shape. The lone guard spun his weapon toward the darkness. Too late. A figure emerged from behind a collapsed pillar, silent, fast, cloaked in dark fabric. There was no gunshot, just a soft, efficient movement. The guard's weapon clattered. He slumped to the floor without a sound. David froze. So did Graves. Miguel squeaked. The pale-eyed man's eyes widened. His voice rang out. "Who is there?" The figure stepped into the glow. A woman, young, focused, her clothes black and utilitarian, her face marked with a narrow scar across the right cheek, and in her hands a leather-bound codex identical to the fragments Miguel carried. She met the pale-eyed man's stare without fear and spoke with a calm, steady voice. "You're too late. The vault belongs to the Council of Dawn now." The pale-eyed man's jaw clenched, eyes burning. "Who the hell is she?" David whispered. Graves stiffened. "I know who. She's one of the unaccounted ones, one of the defectors the Order never found." Miguel trembled violently. "A Dawn Keeper." The woman regarded David for a long moment. Then she said, "The vault awakened because of you, so whether you like it or not, you're coming with me." The pale-eyed man lifted his gun. The Dawn Keeper didn't flinch, and deep below, something ancient groaned open. A door, a chamber, a machine older than any written history. The vault was waiting.
For a heartbeat, the only sound was the pulsing hum from below, steady, rhythmic, impossible to ignore. The ancient mechanism deep in the vault felt closer now, almost aware, as if listening to the standoff unfolding above it. The pale-eyed man tightened his grip on his weapon. The Dawn Keeper watched him without blinking. David's pulse hammered against his ribs. Graves spoke first, quietly, with the kind of voice she used when the next words might decide who lives and dies. "We're all standing on shifting ground, literally. If you fire, the vault reacts. If the vault reacts, we all get buried. Think for 1 second." The pale-eyed man didn't lower his weapon, but he didn't shoot. The Dawn Keeper broke the silence. "My name is Kaela, and unlike any of you, I was raised inside this vault's teachings from birth. I know what's below." Her eyes flicked toward David. "And I know why it woke for him." David glared. "Stop saying that like it means something I understand." "It will," Kaela replied, "if you survive the descent." Miguel gathered what little courage he had. "We must go now. The vault won't stay open once the activation finishes. It closes itself to prevent contamination." "Of what?" Graves asked. Kaela's voice softened. "Knowledge." The hum shifted, a deeper tone, like a bell struck underwater. Dust rained from the ceiling. The stone under their feet shook. Miguel gasped. "It's entering phase 2. We're almost out of time." Kaela stepped back toward the staircase. "Choose quickly. Come down peacefully, or be sealed out, forever." The pale-eyed man raised his weapon again. "You're not going anywhere with him." Kaela held his gaze calmly. "Then shoot me, and watch the vault collapse around your ears." Her confidence rattled even the hunters. Graves whispered to David, "We need to side with her right now." David exhaled hard. He didn't trust Kaela. He didn't trust the pale-eyed man. Hell, he didn't trust any of them except Graves. But he felt it, in his bones, in the air, in the vibration under his feet. The vault wanted him. He didn't know why. He didn't want to know why, but it was undeniable. So he made the only choice that didn't guarantee immediate death. He stepped toward Kaela. "You want me? Fine, but no one shoots unless they want this entire mountain coming down." The pale-eyed man snarled, "You think you can command the room?" "No," David said. "The vault is." Another pulse, so strong the torches on the wall flickered violently. Kaela gestured sharply. "Move!" There was no more time. The group half ran, half stumbled down the spiraling stone staircase as the stairwell shook and groaned. The pale-eyed man cursed, but followed. He couldn't risk losing the vault's contents. As they descended, the glow brightened around them, bathing the walls in cold light. Symbols carved centuries earlier shimmered faintly under the illumination. Spirals, constellations, geometric patterns that seemed to shift when viewed from the corner of the eye. Miguel whispered in awe, "This is older than the church, older than the order, It's pre-Roman. Pre-everything we know, Kaela replied. Keep moving. The staircase ended abruptly at a massive circular chamber cut deep into the earth. A domed ceiling soared overhead, inlaid with metallic lines that caught the pale light and reflected it like a web of stars. But the centerpiece, a monolithic artifact, stood in the middle of the room. 3 meters tall, smooth, dark, carved from a single slab of stone, covered in symbols that glowed like embers. The northern fragment was mounted at the top, the missing piece completing a larger pattern that now pulsed with life. David stared. This isn't a relic. It's a machine. Kaela nodded. A device, a recorder, a transmitter, a warning. The pale-eyed man pushed past them, eyes blazing. We take it, now. Kaela stepped in front of him. Touch it without the sequence, and it will kill you. David felt a strange tug, like gravity pulling him toward the monument. His skin tingled. Kaela watched him move. The vault called you for a reason. It needs a bearer to access the memory. Memory of what? David asked. Miguel answered in a whisper. What happened to the last lost civilization? The room trembled again, a deeper, heavier pulse. A panel on the monolith slid open. Inside, faint lights flickered like a heartbeat. Kaela's eyes widened. It's ready! The pale-eyed man lunged forward. Step aside. Kaela moved to block him. And he fired. The shot rang out, echoing through the chamber. Graves screamed. Miguel ducked. Kaela twisted. The bullet grazed her arm and ricocheted off the stone, sparking violently. The monolith's hum spiked in pitch. The room shuddered. Symbols flashed in rapid sequence. Miguel cried out, "You triggered a defensive cycle!" The pale-eyed man raised his gun again, but he never got the chance to fire. The floor beneath him split open with a thunderous crack, like the stone itself rejected him. He stumbled backward, dropping the weapon. It skittered across the floor and into darkness. David grabbed Graves and pulled her behind a pillar as a blast of cold light erupted from the monolith. Kaela staggered but stayed on her feet, blood running down her arm. The monolith spoke. A voice, not human, not mechanical, a layered, resonant tone that filled the chamber and vibrated through their bones. Bearer identified. David felt the force of the words hit him like a wave. Kaela turned toward him with an expression he couldn't read. Fear, relief, awe. The pale-eyed man stared in shock. No, impossible. He's not. The voice spoke again, louder. Memory sequence initiating. The chamber darkened. The glow intensified. David's vision blurred, and then the world dissolved into light.
Light swallowed everything. David tried to scream, but his voice dissolved, absorbed into a rushing current of images, sound, and sensation. He wasn't standing anymore. He wasn't falling either. He was moving, dragged through a tunnel of brilliance that pulsed in time with his heartbeat. Thousands of symbols, glowing, shifting, spiraled past him like constellations torn from the sky. A voice echoed in the void, layered and ancient. Witness. Then the light broke. He stood in a city, but not a city from any book or film or civilization known to history. Towering structures of obsidian stone curved upward into the sky like petrified waves. Bridges, thin as blades, linked colossal pillars. Water channels cut geometric patterns through the streets, glowing faintly with liquid light. People moved through it, tall, robed figures with angular features and eyes that reflected the luminescent canals. Their clothing shimmered with metallic threads. Their movements were graceful, purposeful, unhurried. A civilization older than Egypt, older than Mesopotamia.
older than humanity's recorded memory. David whispered, This can't be real." But the air smelled of rain on stone. The ground vibrated from distant machinery. His skin tingled from the warm breeze drifting off the glowing canals. It was real, or had been. The voice spoke again, closer, inside his chest. "This was the first dawn." A woman approached him through the crowd. Her face was calm, her eyes bright with intelligence. She walked as though she saw him clearly, though no one else reacted to his presence. Her robe was woven with silver threads that caught the light. She reached for him. "Bearer," she said softly, her voice resonant with the same tone as the monolith. "Walk with me." David stepped forward. The scene around him shifted subtly as they moved. The sky dimmed, clouds thickened, the glowing canals flickered. "Where am I?" asked David. "In Terra Lucida, the city of light, the first cradle of your kind." "My kind?" echoed David, incredulous. "Yes," her eyes met his. "Humanity before the fall." A cold knot formed in David's stomach. "What fall?" She didn't answer, not yet. They walked to a high terrace overlooking the city. From there, the breathtaking scale of it unfurled. Miles of shining architecture, waterways forming intricate patterns, towering obelisks humming with subtle energy. But above the horizon, darkness gathered. A wall of black clouds, silent, unnatural. As they watched, the clouds rippled like something enormous moved behind them. David felt an instinctive terror, a primal warning pulsing through his bones. "What is that?" he whispered. The woman's expression hardened, sadness in her eyes. "The end." Thunder cracked, except it wasn't thunder. It was a deep metallic boom that sounded like the sky itself was fracturing. People in the street stopped, looked up, waited. "They knew, they expected this," David breathed. The woman nodded. "We built wonders, machines, knowledge that reached beyond understanding. We became careless, prideful, blind to the imbalance we created." The black clouds churned violently. Lightning, pale blue, unnatural, lanced downward and struck one of the towering spires. It exploded in a brilliant plume of stone and fire. Screams filled the air. The city trembled. Buildings cracked. The glowing canals dimmed. David felt the ground shake beneath his feet, even though none of this was physical. "Why show me this?" "Because it is happening again." David turned to her, heart pounding. "What is?" "The cycle, the pattern. Every civilization rises until it reaches the light threshold, until it touches the knowledge that destabilizes its foundation. Yours is close now." The sky tore open, literally split down the center, a jagged wound of light and storm. A massive shockwave rolled across the landscape, obliterating everything in its path. David watched the city die, not slowly, not over centuries, in minutes. The woman placed her hand on his shoulder. He felt it, cold, gentle, real. "Remember this," she said, "because when the final fragment awakens, you will have a choice that determines whether your world follows this one into dust." The shockwave hit the terrace. Everything dissolved in blinding white light. David slammed back into his body with a violent jolt. He collapsed to the chamber floor, gasping, drenched in sweat, trembling. The vault was dim again. The monolith hummed softly, its energy settling. Graves knelt beside him. "David, David, talk to me. Are you hurt?" He choked on a breath. I saw them. I saw everything." Miguel stared at him with wide, horrified eyes. You viewed the entire sequence? David nodded. Kaela stood nearby, clutching her wounded arm, watching him with new gravity. The vault chose you for a reason. Now you know why. The pale-eyed man struggled to his feet, shaking with rage. Tell me, he snarled. What did you see? What does the fragment contain? David wiped the sweat from his face, trembling. He met the pale-eyed man's gaze. It contains the history of a world that destroyed itself. A hush fell through the chamber. And, David continued, voice unsteady, and it's a warning. The pale-eyed man took a step forward. A warning of what? David swallowed hard. Of our future.
Silence gripped the vault. No one moved. No one breathed. David felt the tremor still lingering in his bones, the aftershock of a civilization's final scream echoing through time. The pale-eyed man broke the silence first. A warning of our future, he repeated slowly. His eyes flicked to the monolith, then back to David. Then the remaining fragments must contain the solution. Kaela stepped sharply between him and the monolith. You don't understand, she said. This isn't something you control. The fragments aren't blueprints. They're safeguards. The pale-eyed man snorted. Or weapons. Miguel gasped. No, never weapons. They were created to prevent destruction. Exactly, Kaela said, which means they can be misused to cause it. The pale-eyed man's gaze hardened. Knowledge is power, and power belongs to those who can wield it. He moved toward the monolith. Kaela drew a slim blade from her sleeve and placed it under his chin before he took another step. Everyone froze. Try it, she hissed. I'm done warning you. The pale-eyed man didn't flinch. His eyes didn't even blink. He stared into hers with reptilian calm. You won't kill me, he murmured. You need me alive long enough to retrieve the other fragments. Kaela pressed the blade harder. A tiny line of blood appeared on his neck. I need nothing from you. Graves whispered urgently to David. We need to get out of here, now, before they tear each other apart or the vault seals again. Miguel nodded frantically. The mechanism is unstable. It won't stay open long after a full memory transfer. We have minutes. But the pale-eyed man's agents were already recovering. 2 hunters steadied themselves near the entrance to the chamber, weapons drawn, but unsure who to aim at. Kaela glanced at them, then at David. Her voice was low, urgent. We have to escape the vault. Once it closes, the Order will be trapped in here. The pale-eyed man stiffened. What did you say? Kaela smirked. You didn't think the Dawn Keepers would enter without a contingency, did you? Miguel grabbed David's arm. She's right. The vault has begun its closing cycle. David looked at the monolith. The glowing symbols were dimming. The pulsing light was slowing. Dust fell steadily from the ceiling. Kaela stepped back, blade still raised but ready to run. We move. Now. The pale-eyed man shouted, Stop them! The hunters opened fire. Kaela shoved David behind a pillar as bullets ricocheted off stone. Graves ducked and rolled toward a lower alcove. Miguel scrambled toward the staircase, nearly tripping in panic. David grabbed Kaela's uninjured arm. This way. She nodded, and they sprinted toward the spiral stairs. The pale-eyed man's voice cut through the gunfire. Kill the bearer! Now! David felt a bullet whistle past his shoulder and hit the stone beside him. Chips exploded in a spray of dust. Miguel shouted from above, Hurry! Graves fired a stolen weapon, driving 2 hunters back behind a pillar. Kaela slashed another's arm as she passed, sending his rifle clattering to the floor.
David bounded up the stairs 2 at a time. The vault groaned, an old, heavy sound, like an enormous door grinding shut deep underground. Kaela shouted, "It's closing!" David looked back. The pale-eyed man was climbing after them, face twisted with fury, hand bleeding, eyes burning with obsession. "You won't escape!" he roared. A violent tremor shook the staircase. Miguel almost fell, caught himself on the wall, and screamed, "Move!" They reached the top landing just as a deafening crack split the ceiling. Dust and debris rained down. The floor buckled beneath the pale-eyed man, but he kept climbing, unstoppable. David, Graves, Kaela, and Miguel sprinted toward the cellar entrance, but the pale-eyed man's voice rang out behind them, "Lights! Engage!" A blinding flash lit the staircase. David's ears rang, his vision blurred, his knees buckled. When he blinked the light away, the pale-eyed man was suddenly only a few steps behind them, impossibly fast, fueled by rage and something darker. Kaela shoved David toward the exit. "Run!" They burst into the cellar. The vault door behind them shuddered, slow, heavy stone grinding into place. The pale-eyed man lunged, but the vault shut with a thunderous, echoing boom. The shock wave threw David forward onto the floor. For a moment, it was silent. Then, boom! Boom! Fists pounding from the other side. The pale-eyed man screamed, muffled through the sealed stone, "David, you can't hide from what you are!" Miguel collapsed to his knees. "It's closed. It's really closed." Kaela pressed her bleeding arm against her torso. Graves looked at David, her expression trembling with relief and fear. "We need to get out of here before whoever's outside hears that." David nodded slowly, but inside his chest a cold certainty grew. The memory of Terra Lucida pulsed behind his eyes, and the voice of the vault whispered through his mind, "The cycle returns." David realized something horrifying. The vault had not shown him a memory. It had shown him a prophecy. And humanity was already on its way toward the same fate. The pounding on the sealed vault door echoed like a heartbeat beneath the floor. Boom! 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 The pale-eyed man's muffled voice tore through the stone. "David, I will find you. You carry what does not belong to you." Graves tugged David's arm. "We have to move. Now." Miguel scrambled to his feet, shaking so violently his rosary rattled. "There's an emergency exit near the apse, north corridor, but it leads straight into the clearing." Kaela checked the magazine of the rifle she'd taken from a fallen hunter. Half full. Her bleeding arm throbbed, but she didn't flinch. "They'll be waiting." David wiped dust from his face, adrenaline surging. "Then we don't go out the front." Miguel gaped at him. "There's only one other path, and it's—" A metallic groan rumbled under their feet. The vault seals continued locking. Kaela cut him off. "Show us." Miguel swallowed hard and pointed toward a narrow hallway choked with cobwebs and debris. The air was cold, stale. "The ossuary," he said. "It was built before the church. The tunnel eventually leads outside, but it's half collapsed and dark." "Dark is good," Graves said. "Let's go." They sprinted down the corridor. Stones shook. Dust fell. The whole structure trembled like an awakening beast. Behind them, the vault door continued to echo with the pale-eyed man's fury. Boom! 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 The hallway dipped downward into a cramped passage lined with ancient bones, skulls stacked neatly along the walls like silent witnesses. David swallowed. Great. Skeletons. Perfect. Kaela smirked faintly. "You prefer bullets?" They pressed on. The air grew colder. Thick dust swirled around their feet. Miguel led them through a narrow arch where roots burst through the ceiling and curled across the floor. "This way," he whispered. A distant engine rumbled above ground. Graves froze. "They have vehicles, reinforcements." Kaela nodded grimly. "The Order doesn't lose contact. When the pale-eyed man went dark, they sent more." David clenched his jaw. "Then we hide until we can figure out our next move." Miguel pointed to a massive slab of stone partially blocking the tunnel. "We need to crawl through that gap." Kaela shoved her rifle through first, then slid after it despite her wounded arm. Graves followed. Miguel squeezed through next. David dropped to his knees to follow. A bullet whistled past his ear and shattered bone on the wall. David jerked back in shock. "What?" A voice floated from the darkness behind them. Male. Calm. Too calm. "We found you." 3 red laser dots appeared on the wall beside David's head. Kaela shouted from the other side of the stone slab, "David, move!" David dove into the gap as gunfire erupted behind him, stone exploding, splinters of ancient bone spraying through the air. He rolled into the next section of tunnel as Kaela yanked the slab upright with a grunt. It slammed into place, blocking the gunman's line of sight. Bullets hammered the stone from the other side, but it held. Kaela breathed out, eyes fierce. "They'll come around the long way. We need speed." They pushed forward. The tunnel grew narrower, wetter. The ceiling dipped so low they had to crouch. A distant rumble of water echoed ahead. Miguel pointed to a faint glow. "The exit chamber. We're close." They hurried toward it, but just as they entered the small stone chamber, they froze. A vertical shaft opened to the surface above, sunlight filtering through tangled roots. But the exit was 10 feet up, smooth stone walls offering no handholds. Graves groaned. "Seriously?" Kaela slung her rifle and crouched. "Use me as a step." "You're injured," David protested. "Not dead," she snapped. "Move." Graves climbed first, using Kaela's back and shoulders to reach the upper ledge. Miguel went next, trembling. David was last. As he reached the top, Graves grabbed his hand and hauled him out. Kaela followed, gritting her teeth as her wounded arm scraped the stone. They emerged into a dense thicket behind the mission, sunlight filtering through the canopy, birds scattering. David took one breath, only one, before he heard it. Engines, voices, footsteps. Kaela pulled him down, they're close. Through the brush, David saw them. Dozens of Order operatives sweeping the grounds with military precision, dressed in black tactical gear, rifles raised. One operative pointed at the mission. "No movement. The vault is sealed." Another spoke into a headset. "Theta Squad, fan out. Theta Sigma, drones up." A small quad-rotor drone rose into the air, its camera sweeping the forest. David's blood ran cold. Graves whispered, "They'll find us in minutes." Kaela scanned the top trees. "Not if we move north. There's a ravine, narrows the thermal profile enough to avoid detection." Miguel blinked. "You know this area?" Kaela didn't answer. David studied her. "You scouted this place before today?" She met his eyes without hesitation. The Dawnkeepers knew the Order would eventually come for the northern fragment. We've been preparing for years. David felt a deeper dread. What exactly are the Dawnkeepers preparing for? Kaela exhaled, tired and resolute. For the awakening of the second fragment, the eastern piece. And now that the northern fragment has activated, she looked toward the sky, where the drone hovered, searching. The countdown has already started. Miguel clutched his rosary. "The second fragment, it's..." Kaela covered his mouth. "Not here. Not now. We're surrounded." David whispered, "We need to leave. Fast." Kaela nodded. "Follow me. Stay low. Stay silent." They moved through the thicket, slipping deeper into the woods. Behind them, a drone veered sharply, its camera turning toward the brush where they had just been. Through the crackling speaker, an operative's voice barked, "Contact, northeast quadrant, movement detected." David's heart slammed into his ribs. Kaela shouted, "Run!" They sprinted into the forest as shouts erupted and rifles cocked behind them. The drone swooped lower, vehicles revved to life, footsteps thundered through the undergrowth. The hunt had begun, and with every step David took, the echo of the woman's voice from the vault whispered in his mind. When the second fragment awakens, the choice will be yours.
Branches whipped across David's arms as he tore through the forest, lungs burning, breath ragged. Behind him, the Order's operatives crashed through the trees, shouts, snapping twigs, the hum of the drone closing in overhead. Kaela sprinted ahead, fast and purposeful despite her injury. Graves stayed behind David, rifle ready, turning occasionally to fire short bursts that bought them seconds but not safety. "Left," Kaela hissed, "down the slope." They skidded down a steep incline carpeted with dead leaves. Miguel stumbled, tumbling halfway before Graves caught him by the collar and dragged him upright. The drone dipped lower, its spotlight stabbing through the canopy. "Thermals have them," an operative barked from somewhere above. "Two downslope, two trailing, cut them off!" Kaela swore under her breath. "Move, move, move!" Gunfire tore through the trees, splinters exploding around them. David dove behind a fallen trunk as bullets ripped through the bark. Kaela pointed. "The ravine is ahead, 50 yards!" Graves fired blindly toward the gunmen, forcing them to duck. "Go, I'll cover!" "Graves!" David shouted. "Just go!" They sprinted the remaining distance as Graves laid down suppressive fire. The ground suddenly vanished beneath them. David stumbled to a halt at the edge of a deep ravine, 30 feet down, maybe more. A narrow stream glinted at the bottom like a silver thread. Kaela didn't hesitate. "Slide down." She sat, braced her feet, and pushed herself over the edge. Dirt and stones cascaded as she slid down the steep embankment, landing hard on the creek bed below. Miguel followed, screaming the whole way. David glanced back. Graves was still firing, backing toward the edge. "Graves, come on!" Graves finally turned and dove over the edge, sliding, tumbling, swearing. David went last, half sliding, half falling, hitting the bottom with a bone-jarring thud. Kaela dragged them under a dense overhang of roots and rock. "Quiet," she whispered. "They'll send eyes up top." A moment later, operatives reached the ravine rim. Shadows crossed above. The drone hovered, humming like an angry insect. "Negative visual," one operative called from somewhere above. "Thermals confused. Multiple false signatures from the water." Miguel whispered shakily. "The stream, it's cold enough to distort heat." Kaela nodded. "Exactly why we came here." David listened as the voices moved along the edge, fading slightly but not enough. "They're spreading out," Graves said quietly. "We bought time, not escape." Kaela looked at David, urgency blazing in her eyes. "We're headed east." David frowned. "Because of the second fragment?" Kaela shook her head. "No, because they expect us to run north, toward the highway, toward people." Graves smirked. "So instead, we disappear into the wilderness with no map, no resources, and an army hunting us." "Exactly," she said. Miguel gulped. "Does anyone else realize how insane this is?" "No one said survival was sane," Kaela replied. She crouched low and moved upstream beneath the overhang until the ravine curved sharply out of sight from the operatives above. Once the canopy thickened enough to hide them, they climbed back onto the creek bed and followed the water deeper into the forest. The drone's hum gradually faded. For a few minutes, only the rush of water and their footsteps filled the air. David finally breathed. "So, the eastern fragment, you were going to tell us back there?" Miguel shook his head violently. "We shouldn't talk here. Sound carries.
They might have auditory sensors. Kaela stopped abruptly. "Here," she said, pointing to a split in the ravine wall, an uneven crack narrow enough to squeeze through. "That is definitely a snake pit, or a bat pit, or a death pit," Graves said. Kaela ignored him and slid inside sideways. "Follow me. Once we're deep enough, we can talk." They squeezed into the fissure one by one until the daylight shrank behind them. The space opened into a small cavern dripping with moisture, lit only by a faint shaft of light through cracks overhead. "Okay, we're safe for a few minutes," Kaela whispered. David leaned against the rock wall. "Tell me everything." Miguel removed a small waterproof pouch from under his shirt. Inside was a brittle, folded sheet of parchment. David's pulse quickened. "You have a map?" Miguel nodded. "Not a full one, but a location, or rather, a clue to one." He unfolded the parchment carefully. It contained 4 lines written in early 16th century Portuguese. "Where dawn first breaks, and mountains guard the sky, the second spark sleeps, where the sun meets stone." Graves frowned. "Poetry. Great. That's helpful." Kaela shook her head. "It's more literal than it seems." She looked at David. "You asked earlier what the Dawn Keepers had been preparing for. Here's the truth." David waited. Kaela pointed to the poem. "That place where dawn first breaks isn't Europe. It's not Asia. It's not Africa." She dropped her voice to a whisper. "It's the American East Coast." David blinked. "What?" Miguel nodded vigorously. "More specifically, one of the earliest places the sun hits the continent, a place with high mountains guarding the horizon." David's mind spun through a mental atlas, running state by state, coastline by coastline. Kaela stared him straight in the eye. "The eastern fragment," she said with absolute certainty, "is somewhere in Maine."
David felt the weight of Kaela's words settle like stones in his chest. Maine. Of all places. Remote, rugged, impossible to traverse quickly. And yet, according to the map and the prophecy, that's exactly where the next piece lay. Graves broke the silence first, brushing moisture from her hair. "Maine? You're telling me the vault in Boston woke for a reason, and now we're supposed to run across forests, rivers, and mountains in the middle of an army hunt?" Kaela didn't flinch. "Yes, and we'll need to move before the Order realizes the vault is truly sealed. Once they regroup, they'll comb the surrounding forest systematically. They'll sweep this ravine in hours." Miguel swallowed hard. "We can't outrun them on foot. Not like this." "You're right," said Kaela. "That's why we use misdirection." David narrowed his eyes. "Misdirection?" Kaela crouched low and pointed to the far end of the cavern, where a narrow underground stream disappeared into darkness. "The stream exits half a mile south of the ravine. The Order expects us to move northeast. Instead, we'll follow this channel. Water will mask our heat signatures, and the sound will cover our footsteps." David nodded slowly, adrenaline mixing with apprehension. "I hope this works." Graves checked her weapon, then muttered, "It better, because if it doesn't, we're dead." Miguel shivered. "And then the northern fragment is useless. All this risk for nothing." Kaela's expression hardened. "No. Even if we die, the northern fragment will remain sealed. That much we owe to Terra Lucida. But if we survive, and we reach the eastern fragment, then humanity has a chance to learn from what the vault has already warned us." David swallowed hard, feeling the cold cavern press against him. The hum of the vault still echoed faintly in his mind, a memory residue, a warning. "Let's move," Kaela said sharply. "Quiet, slow, stay in the water." One by one, they lowered themselves into the shallow stream. The icy water bit at exposed skin. They huddled together as the channel narrowed. Droplets fell from the cavern ceiling, echoing like distant gunshots.
Every sound made David's heart jump. Half an hour passed in near silence. Only the water's rush and the occasional drip filled the cavern. The narrow walls pressed against them. Miguel's breathing grew ragged, but Kaela kept him focused. "Almost there," she whispered. "One more bend." Then, faint above the rushing water, they heard it. A distant metallic clink. David froze. What was that? Kaela's eyes narrowed. Hunters. They're sweeping the ravine above. They've discovered the false trail. Graves hissed, "We need to hurry." They slipped through the final bend in the stream, and the channel opened into a hidden waterfall-fed pool. Sunlight filtered down through a crack above, illuminating a narrow ledge just wide enough for them to scramble onto solid rock. David pulled himself up, breath heaving. "We made it." Kaela shook her head. "Not yet. The Order will not give up. And the eastern fragment's location, it's more dangerous than you realize." Miguel looked around the small cliffside pool. "Why? It's just mountains, forests, rivers." Kaela's voice dropped to a whisper. "Because Maine hides more than forests and mountains. The last caretakers of Terra Lucida left traces in its glacial caves. Some tunnels haven't seen human eyes for centuries, and worse, some tunnels are guarded by mechanisms older than the vault itself." David swallowed, feeling the ice-cold water still dripping down his neck. "Mechanisms? Like traps?" Kaela nodded grimly. "Traps, guardians, and not all of them are inanimate." Graves whispered sharply, "You're saying something alive?" Kaela gave a tight nod. If Terra Lucida had one fragment buried here, it didn't leave it unprotected. They hid it where only someone chosen by the northern fragment could survive the trials. David's pulse raced. "So we're the ones chosen?" Kaela's eyes held his. "Whether we like it or not, yes. The vault picked you. You carry its mark. The northern fragment will guide the eastern one, but it won't be easy. And the Order, they will try to take it from us before we even reach the caves." A sudden rustle in the trees above snapped their attention skyward. The drone had returned. Its sensors swept the cliffs, catching sunlight off the water. Kaela hissed, pulling David back behind a rock. "Move! Now! We follow the river downstream. There's a hidden path through the cliffs that leads east into the mountains. If we stay in open ground, we're dead before nightfall." They slipped back into the icy water, moving as silently as possible. Every step, every splash echoed in David's mind like the heartbeat of the vault itself. Ahead, the channel split into a narrower, twisting gorge. Kaela signaled for them to follow. David's heart pounded. Somewhere in these mountains lay the second fragment. Somewhere the eastern fragment waited to awaken. And somewhere above, the Order was still hunting them, unaware that the very currents of history were about to sweep them into an encounter that would decide the fate of two fragments, and possibly the entire world. The gorge narrowed sharply, cliffs rising on either side like jagged teeth. The water rushed faster here, cold and violent, forcing David to fight for every foothold. Kaela moved ahead with unnerving confidence, her arms still bleeding, her eyes scanning every shadow. Graves hissed, "This water's trying to sweep us off the cliff." Kaela didn't answer. She just kept moving. "Focus. The fragment's trail leads to the highest cavern in these mountains. From there, the vault's legacy guides the way." Miguel shivered. "And the Order? They'll be honest in minutes, if not seconds." Kaela glanced back. "Then we don't stop. Not for breath, not for fear." They scrambled over slippery stones, the water crashing over their boots, ice biting through thin clothing. A sudden screech echoed from above. A drone flitted between cliff walls, sensors scanning for heat. Graves ducked behind a boulder. Hold still, Kaela hissed. It can't detect water-camouflaged heat if we move slowly. David followed her instructions, inching forward, muscles trembling. He could hear the pounding footsteps and shouts of the order above growing louder. The gorge seemed alive, every ripple in the water echoing like drums of pursuit. Then Kaela froze. "Shh," she whispered sharply. "Caves ahead." They approached a narrow mouth carved into the cliff face, partially hidden behind cascading water. Ancient symbols, eroded but still faintly glowing, lined the stone around the entrance. Miguel gasped. "This isn't natural." David reached out, touching the stone. A faint vibration pulsed under his fingertips, something ancient, mechanical, yet alive. Kaela pressed a hand to the wall. "These are the first of Terra Lucida's guardians, not traps for the faint-hearted, but tests for those bearing the northern fragment." David looked at her. "Tests?" Kaela nodded. Grimly, "They determine if the fragment's bearer is worthy. Step wrong, the mechanism triggers defenses, natural and not so natural." A low growl echoed from within the cave. Not animal, not entirely mechanical. David felt it resonate in his chest. Graves whispered, teeth clenched, "This water is trying to sweep us off the cliff." Kaela didn't answer. She just kept moving. "Focus. The fragment's trail leads to the highest cavern in these mountains. From there, the vault's legacy guides the way." Miguel shivered. "And the order? They'll be on us in minutes, if not seconds." Kaela glanced back. "Then we don't stop. Not for breath, not for fear." They scrambled over slippery stones, the water crashing over their boots, ice biting through thin clothing. A sudden screech echoed from above. A drone flitted between cliff walls, sensors scanning for heat. Graves ducked behind a boulder. "Hold still," Kaela hissed. "It can't detect water-camouflaged heat if we move slowly." David followed her instructions, inching forward, muscles trembling. He could hear the pounding footsteps and shouts of the order above growing louder. The gorge seemed alive, every ripple in the water echoing like drums of pursuit. Then Kaela froze. "Shh," she whispered sharply. "Caves ahead." They approached a narrow mouth carved into the cliff face, partially hidden behind cascading water. Ancient symbols, eroded but still faintly glowing, lined the stone around the entrance. Miguel gasped. "This isn't natural." David reached out, touching the stone. A faint vibration pulsed under his fingertips, something ancient, mechanical, yet alive. Kaela pressed a hand to the wall. "These are the first of Terra Lucida's guardians, not traps for the faint-hearted, but tests for those bearing the northern fragment." David looked at her. "Tests?" Kaela nodded. Grimly, "They determine if the fragment's bearer is worthy. Step wrong, the mechanism triggers defenses, natural and not so natural." A low growl echoed from within the cave. Not animal, not entirely mechanical. David felt it resonate in his chest. Graves whispered, teeth clenched, "This water is trying to sweep us off the cliff." Kaela didn't answer. She just kept moving. "Focus. The fragment's trail leads to the highest cavern in these mountains. From there, the vault's legacy guides the way." Miguel shivered. "And the order? They'll be on us in minutes, if not seconds." Kaela glanced back. "Then we don't stop. Not for breath, not for fear." They scrambled over slippery stones, the water crashing over their boots, ice biting through thin clothing. A sudden screech echoed from above. A drone flitted between cliff walls, sensors scanning for heat. Graves ducked behind a boulder. "Hold still," Kaela hissed. "It can't detect water-camouflaged heat if we move slowly." David followed her instructions, inching forward, muscles trembling. He could hear the pounding footsteps and shouts of the order above growing louder.
The gorge seemed alive, every ripple in the water echoing like drums of pursuit. Then Kaela froze. "Shh," she whispered sharply. "Caves ahead." They approached a narrow mouth carved into the cliff face, partially hidden behind cascading water. Ancient symbols, eroded but still faintly glowing, lined the stone around the entrance. Miguel gasped. "This is unnatural." David reached out, touching the stone. A faint vibration pulsed under his fingertips, something ancient, mechanical, yet alive. Kaela pressed a hand to the wall. "These are the first of Terra Lucida's guardians, not traps for the faint-hearted, but tests for those bearing the northern fragment." David looked at her. "Tests?" Kaela nodded. Grimly, "They determine if the fragment's bearer is worthy. Step wrong, the mechanism triggers defenses, natural and not so natural." A low growl echoed from within the cave. Not animal, not entirely mechanical. David felt it resonate in his chest. Graves whispered, teeth clenched, "This water is trying to sweep us off the cliff." Kaela didn't answer. She just kept moving. "Focus. The fragment's trail leads to the highest cavern in these mountains. From there, the vault's legacy guides the way." Miguel shivered. "And the order? They'll be on us in minutes, if not seconds." Kaela glanced back. "Then we don't stop. Not for breath, not for fear." They scrambled over slippery stones, the water crashing over their boots, ice biting through thin clothing. A sudden screech echoed from above. A drone flitted between cliff walls, sensors scanning for heat. Graves ducked behind a boulder. "Hold still," Kaela hissed. "It can't detect water-camouflaged heat if we move slowly." David followed her instructions, inching forward, muscles trembling. He could hear the pounding footsteps and shouts of the order above growing louder. The gorge seemed alive, every ripple in the water echoing like drums of pursuit. Then Kaela froze. "Shh," she whispered sharply. "Caves ahead." They approached a narrow mouth carved into the cliff face, partially hidden behind cascading water. Ancient symbols, eroded but still faintly glowing, lined the stone around the entrance. Miguel gasped, "This is unnatural." David reached out, touching the stone. A faint vibration pulsed under his fingertips, something ancient, mechanical, yet alive. Kaela pressed a hand to the wall. "These are the first of Terra Lucida's guardians, not traps for the faint-hearted, but tests for those bearing the northern fragment." David looked at her. "Tests?" Kaela nodded. Grimly, "They determine if the fragment's bearer is worthy. Step wrong, the mechanism triggers defenses, natural and not so natural." A low growl echoed from within the cave. Not animal, not entirely mechanical. David felt it resonate in his chest. Graves whispered, teeth clenched, "This water is trying to sweep us off the cliff." Kaela didn't answer. She just kept moving. "Focus. The fragment's trail leads to the highest cavern in these mountains. From there, the vault's legacy guides the way." Miguel shivered. "And the order? They'll be on us in minutes, if not seconds." Kaela glanced back. "Then we don't stop. Not for breath, not for fear." They scrambled over slippery stones, the water crashing over their boots, ice biting through thin clothing. A sudden screech echoed from above. A drone flitted between cliff walls, sensors scanning for heat. Graves ducked behind a boulder. "Hold still," Kaela hissed. "It can't detect water-camouflaged heat if we move slowly." David followed her instructions, inching forward, muscles trembling. He could hear the pounding footsteps and shouts of the order above growing louder. The gorge seemed alive, every ripple in the water echoing like drums of pursuit. Then Kaela froze.
Shh! The Guardian's form hovered silently above the dais, its edges still flickering like smoke caught in a gust.
its glowing eyes fixated on David, but there was no aggression now, only observation. Kaela whispered sharply, "Do not show fear. Move deliberately. The fragment will guide you through the trial." David's hand trembled as he reached closer to the eastern fragment. Its light pulsed in sync with the northern fragment in his pocket, creating a rhythm that seemed to push back the shadows in the chamber. One careful step onto the dais. Another. The guardian's hum deepened, vibrating through the stone beneath his feet. The room seemed to contract and expand with each pulse. David's chest tightened. Sweat dripped from his forehead. He could feel the fragments communicating, a silent, ancient dialogue he barely understood. Kaela whispered sharply, "Do not show fear. Move deliberately. The fragment will guide you through the trial." David's hand trembled as he reached closer to the eastern fragment. Its light pulsed in sync with the northern fragment in his pocket, creating a rhythm that seemed to push back the shadows in the chamber. One careful step onto the dais. Another. The guardian's hum deepened, vibrating through the stone beneath his feet. The room seemed to contract and expand with each pulse. David's chest tightened. Sweat dripped from his forehead. He could feel the fragments communicating, a silent, ancient dialogue he barely understood. Kaela whispered sharply, "Do not hesitate." David reached out with both hands. The moment his fingers grazed the eastern fragment, a surge of energy coursed through him. Light shot from the fragment in blinding waves, casting the chamber in pure white brilliance. The guardian recoiled slightly, its form rippling. Then, almost imperceptibly, it bowed. David gasped. It accepted me." Kaela's eyes shone with relief. "The fragments recognize their bearer. The trial is complete, for now." Miguel, trembling, whispered, That's insane. 2 fragments together?" The northern fragment vibrated in David's pocket. The eastern fragment hummed in his hands. Together, they formed a resonance that filled the chamber, echoing across the mountain. David could feel knowledge, memories, and warnings flowing into him. Images of Terra Lucida, its rise and destruction, cities of light, rivers of energy, civilizations surpassing any human history. And then, the future. The fragments showed him cities in ruin, forests ablaze, oceans rising, all triggered by human greed, ignorance, and ambition. But they also showed hope, ways to avert catastrophe, hidden paths that only a bearer could follow. David stumbled back, clutching the eastern fragment. I see it all. What happened to them, and what could happen to us." Kaela nodded. "That's why the Order is hunting you. They want control of the fragments, and with both, they could accelerate destruction instead of preventing it." Suddenly, the cavern trembled violently. Dust rained from the ceiling. Water splashed from the channel, and a distant roar echoed through the mountain. Graves shouted, "What now?" Kaela's expression darkened. "The Order is here. They've found the mountain's path. They're moving in fast." David gripped the eastern fragment tightly. Its energy pulsed faster, warning him. "We can't leave them to take it. We have to escape, and we have to fight if they follow." A crash echoed from the cave entrance. Rocks tumbled. Shadows flickered across the chamber walls. Kaela motioned, voice low but firm. "Through the side tunnel. There's a secondary exit that leads east into the high mountains. Move." They sprinted toward the tunnel. The fragment's light illuminated the path, revealing narrow steps carved into the stone centuries ago. The water from the stream rushed around their feet, adding a treacherous element to their flight.
Suddenly, a group of Order operatives appeared at the tunnel entrance, weapons raised. "Stop them!" one shouted. Graves fired a few warning shots. Miguel ducked behind a rock, clutching his rosary. David raised the eastern fragment, its glow bright enough to momentarily blind the approaching operatives. Kaela leapt into action, blade in hand. She moved like a shadow, incapacitating two operatives silently. The rest hesitated, blinded and disoriented by the fragment's brilliance. David realized then that the fragments were not just repositories of knowledge, they were weapons, not necessarily against people, but against threats to the balance they protected. He ran, following Kaela into the secondary tunnel, the hum of both fragments filling his head. The Order pursued, but the twists and turns of the mountain path slowed them. Rocks fell, water sprayed, shadows danced. At last, they emerged onto a jagged cliffside. Below, the forests of Maine stretched endlessly, mountains guarding the horizon as far as the eye could see. Kaela looked at David. "We have both fragments. We've passed the first trials, but this is only the beginning. The next fragment won't wait for us. It has already begun to awaken." David's grip tightened. "Then we have to find it, before they do." Above, a drone whined in the sky. Orders shouted through the treetops. The hunt was far from over. But for the first time, David understood the scale of what they were facing. A war not just for fragments, but for the fate of the world. The wind swept through the cliffs, carrying the faint hum of the fragments, a reminder that Terra Lucida's legacy was alive, and its guardians were watching. And somewhere deep in the mountains, the next trial awaited. The wind howled across the cliffside as David, Kaela, Graves, and Miguel crouched behind jagged rocks, catching their breath. Below, the dense Maine forest stretched like a dark ocean, endless and full of shadows. Above, the drone circled lazily, red sensor beams scanning. The Order shouts echoed faintly from the cliffs and the tree line below. They were close, too close. Kaela motioned. "We move east, high ground. Keep the fragments covered. Don't let them see their glow." David held the eastern fragment close, its light pulsing against his chest. The northern fragment hummed in his pocket, warm and insistent. Together, they seemed alive, reacting to the threat around them. Graves whispered, teeth clenched. "How do you plan to move undetected with a glowing beacon on you?" Kaela smirked faintly. "We don't. We move fast enough that they can't adjust in time." They scrambled down the jagged path, every step careful but urgent. The fragment's energy seemed to interact with the mountain itself. The rocks beneath their feet pulsed faintly, subtle vibrations in sync with the hum. David felt a strange connection forming, like the mountain recognized the fragments as its own. Suddenly, Miguel gasped, "Look!" Through a break in the trees, they saw a hidden plateau, a flat expanse of granite where the sun hit directly. The surface was etched with ancient carvings, symbols faint but unmistakable. Kaela's eyes widened. "This is a waypoint. Terra Lucida's map marks it. The second fragment's influence already reaches here." David approached cautiously, fragments in hand. As he stepped onto the carved granite, the eastern fragment reacted violently, glowing brighter, vibrating in his grip. Symbols on the stone flickered, aligning with the fragment's energy. A low rumble shook the plateau. Then, from the forest below, the Order emerged. Vehicles pushed through trees, operatives advancing, their weapons glinting in sunlight. Kaela hissed, "We've caught our scent. Prepare yourselves." David felt the fragment's energy surge, a heat that ran through his veins. The northern fragment pulsed faster, the eastern fragment shining brighter, as if responding to imminent danger. Suddenly, the eastern fragment emitted a beam of light, striking the carved symbols on the plateau. The stone glowed, and the air vibrated like a tuning fork. David felt his mind fill with ancient knowledge, warnings, paths, solutions, and fragments of power he could barely comprehend. From the forest, one of the Order operatives raised a weapon and fired. The bullet struck the glowing plateau and ricocheted harmlessly, deflected by an invisible force surrounding the fragments. David stared, awestruck. "It's protecting us." Kaela nodded. "The fragment's power is defensive, but only while we remain worthy. If we falter, it won't hesitate." The Order regrouped, shouting, moving in coordinated lines. David felt the fragments tugging him, showing hidden paths along the plateau and into the high ridges of the mountains. Graves grabbed his arm. "We can't fight them all. We have to run." David exhaled, letting the fragments guide him. The symbols on the plateau aligned like a compass, pointing east along a narrow mountain trail barely visible through the trees. Kaela led the way. "Follow the light and do exactly as it shows. Every step counts." As they moved, the fragments pulsed again. This time, the light extended outward, forming a faint path over rocks and roots, alerting them to traps hidden by centuries of nature and human neglect. David realized then the eastern fragment wasn't just a source of energy or knowledge. It was a map, a guide, a guardian. And together with the northern fragment, it amplified his awareness, reacting to danger before they could even see it. Behind them, the Order advanced through the forest, determined, organized, ruthless. But with the fragments guiding them, David could anticipate every step, every ambush. Kaela glanced at him, eyes sharp. "We're close, but the real test isn't survival. It's what happens when the Order realizes the fragments aren't just tools, they're intelligence." David swallowed hard, feeling the weight of centuries of Terra Lucida knowledge coursing through him. The eastern fragment pulsed in his hands, as if confirming her words. Above the mountains, clouds gathered. The sky darkened, not with storm, but with portent. David knew then the chase was far from over. The fragments were awakening, and with each pulse, each hum, the mountain, the forest, and the Order's pursuit were about to converge in a confrontation that would test everything they had survived and everything they had yet to face. The narrow mountain trail twisted sharply, cliffs on one side, sheer drops on the other. The fragments pulsed urgently, warning David of danger before he could even see it. Kaela led the way, moving like a shadow, blade ready. Graves stayed close, scanning the forest for any movement, while Miguel stumbled behind them, panting. Then the forest erupted. From the tree line, the Order poured out, half a dozen operatives firing, advancing in coordinated lines. David froze for a heartbeat, then felt the fragment's pulse. Warmth surged through his chest. The eastern fragment flared. A wall of light shot outward, rippling over the rocky slope like liquid energy. Bullets struck it and ricocheted harmlessly. The Order staggered, shielding their eyes. Kaela's voice cut through the chaos. "Now, move along the safe path." David followed the illuminated trail projected by the fragments. Every step on the mountain was dangerous. Roots, loose stones, uneven terrain. But the fragments lit only safe footholds. The Order hesitated, unable to advance without exposing themselves. One operative tried to flank from above, climbing a slope. The northern fragment vibrated violently in David's pocket. He turned, and a beam of energy extended from the eastern fragment, striking the slope. Rocks tumbled down, cutting off the operative's path. Graves whispered, awestruck, "It's controlling the terrain." Kaela nodded without turning. "It adapts, protects, guides, but it's not infinite. Use it wisely." Another operative raised a rifle, firing directly at David. The fragments flared again. The bullet hit the energy shield surrounding him and dissolved into a flash of light. Miguel screamed, "It's like magic!" David's pulse synchronized with the fragment's energy. He realized he could feel the safest path through the chaos, anticipate threats before they emerged, and even manipulate the light to deflect attacks.
Kaela shouted, "Keep moving. The trail leads to the ravine's edge. From there we can reach the high plateau, where the next clue lies." David sprinted, heart pounding, fragments glowing brightly. The order pursued, but every step he took was guided by the pulsing energy. Rocks shifted underfoot, streams diverted subtly, roots rose to create obstacles. The fragments were turning the terrain against their hunters. An operative lunged from the side, trying to grab David. The eastern fragment flared violently. Light enveloped the operative, knocking him backward into a tree. Graves grinned, adrenaline surging. "Holy! Did you see that?" David kept moving. The fragment's pulses grew faster, their resonance now almost deafening in his chest. He felt ancient Terra Lucida intelligence flowing through him. Warnings, pathways, even strategies for evading and disabling pursuers. The trail opened onto a narrow cliff ledge. Below, the ravine dropped sharply, trees like a dark ocean. Kaela paused. "Jump. Follow the fragments." David glanced down. The gap was wide, impossible to cross safely by ordinary means. But the eastern fragment pulsed, bright and insistent, as if saying, "Trust me." David inhaled and leapt. Light enveloped him midair, cushioning his fall. He hit the ground with a thud, but no bones broke. The fragment's energy seemed to suspend him for a fraction of a second, then guided him safely to the other side. Graves followed, landing hard but intact. Miguel stumbled, but the fragment stabilized him as well. Kaela was last. Her injured arm bled, but the fragments extended their protective glow around her, softening her landing. Behind them, the order froze at the cliff's edge. The fragment's light radiated across the ravine, preventing pursuit. David's breath came in ragged gasps. It saved us." Kaela nodded. "The eastern fragment responds to danger, but it won't do everything. Eventually, we'll need skill and strategy. The order is relentless, and the mountains are full of hidden perils." Miguel whispered, awestruck, This power, it's beyond anything human." David clenched both fragments in his hands. "Then we have a chance. We can survive this and find the next clue." Kaela's eyes scanned the mountains. "We do not have time to celebrate. The order will regroup, and they will push harder. We need to move east toward the caves marked in the Terra Lucida map. That's where the second fragment truly awakens." As they began moving along the ledge, the fragments pulsed again. Warmer, stronger, guiding them. The order was behind them, shouting commands, searching, advancing. But David finally understood something crucial. The fragments weren't just guiding them. They were alive, responding to intent, judgment, and courage. And for the first time, he felt a glimmer of hope. The mountains of Maine awaited. The next trial, the true awakening of the eastern fragment, and the path toward controlling the fragments and possibly humanity's fate was just ahead. The high plateau rose sharply above the tree line, jagged granite cliffs cutting into the sky. The wind bit through their clothes as David, Kaela, Graves, and Miguel crested the ridge. Below them, the forest stretched endlessly, shadows crawling where the order regrouped. Kaela held a hand up. "Quiet, this is it. The second trial. The eastern fragment is strongest here, but it will test us, not just the order." David felt the fragment pulsing violently in his hands, its light bright enough to pierce the thinning clouds above. The northern fragment hummed in his pocket, resonating in perfect synchrony. Miguel whispered, voice trembling, "Test us? How? We just survived the chase." Kaela didn't answer. Her eyes were fixed on the plateau's center, where concentric carvings etched into the stone began to glow faintly as the fragments pulsed. Symbols, geometric, celestial, unfamiliar, activated with an eerie precision, matching the fragment's rhythm. David stepped forward cautiously. The fragment's energy shot beams into the carvings, and suddenly, the ground trembled. Granite plates shifted, revealing pits, channels of rushing water, and glimmering stones embedded in the rock. Graves muttered, "Great, another death maze." From the far edge of the plateau, shadows detached from the stone, like living smoke. Guardians, similar to the one in the Maine cavern, but larger, more fluid, moving unnaturally. Kaela hissed, "Keep the fragments aligned. Let them guide your steps." David followed her lead. The northern fragment pulsed, showing him the safest path across the moving granite, while the eastern fragment flared in his hands, illuminating the Guardian's weak points. An arrow of light shot from the eastern fragment, striking a Guardian as it lunged toward Miguel. The entity recoiled, rippling like liquid shadow. Miguel yelped, It's fighting for us." David realized the eastern fragment wasn't just a shield or a map. It could actively defend, manipulate energy, and even interact with Terra Lucida's ancient mechanisms. The Guardians attacked relentlessly. Granite slabs rose and fell like waves, channels of water surged, and the carving shifted, creating traps that required precise timing. Each pulse of the fragments revealed the correct steps, the right stones, the places to avoid. David felt his mind merge with the fragment's intelligence. Every beat of energy was guidance, every hum a warning. "Step here, avoid there," the light seemed to whisper. David led them across a bridge of stone that rose from the plateau like a spine. Shadows of the Guardians lunged from beneath, but the eastern fragment's energy deflected them into the air. Graves shouted, awestruck, It's like the mountain itself is helping us." David glanced at the eastern fragment. Its glow pulsed in a heartbeat rhythm, faster now, almost like it anticipated every attack, every trap. The northern fragment in his pocket responded in tandem, reinforcing the connection. Then they reached the center of the plateau. A circular dais rose from the stone, etched with symbols older than human memory. The eastern fragment pulsed violently, and a beam of light shot from it, striking the dais. The Guardians froze. The stone beneath them hummed. The carvings glowed with blinding light, then projected spectral images, maps, constellations, and what looked like fragments of history. David saw Terra Lucida, its rise and fall, and the paths the fragments had traveled through time. Kaela whispered, "The fragment is awakening fully, and it's showing us the way to the next location. But it will not reveal everything. We must prove ourselves worthy to carry its knowledge further." Suddenly, the order appeared at the edge of the plateau, dozens of operatives moving carefully. They hadn't seen the path illuminated by the fragments. They were blind to the energy guiding the Dawn Keepers. David realized with growing clarity, the fragments weren't just powerful, they were intelligent, choosing who could access their knowledge, who could manipulate them, and who would be rejected. Kaela's eyes met his. "This is it. If we survive this, we gain full guidance to the eastern fragment's true resting place. Fail, and the Order could seize control. And if they do, humanity will face another catastrophe just like Terra Lucida."
The Guardians surged forward, shadows coiling like liquid smoke, their glowing eyes fixed on David and the group. Every movement was predatory, deliberate, yet eerily fluid, as if they existed partially out of sync with time itself. Kaela hissed, "Keep moving! Let the fragments guide you! Trust them!" David's hands tightened around the eastern fragment. Its glow flared violently, pulsing with each Guardian's motion. The northern fragment vibrated in his pocket, resonating in perfect rhythm. The two fragments seemed to communicate, predicting danger before it arrived. A Guardian lunged at Miguel. David instinctively raised the eastern fragment. A radiant wave of energy erupted, slamming the shadow into the plateau's stone. The Guardian recoiled, vapor curling from its edges like mist evaporating in sunlight. Graves ducked behind a raised slab. "Holy, did that just obliterate it?" Kaela didn't answer, her focus sharp. "It can't destroy them completely yet, but it can contain, repel, and guide. The fragments will show the path if you listen." The carved stones underfoot shifted, creating a labyrinth of narrow pathways and moving platforms. Water channels surged along the edges. Every misstep could send them sliding into the depths below. David felt the fragments pulsing violently, turning him toward the center dais. The Guardians converged, blocking the path. A sudden surge of energy erupted from the eastern fragment. Light shot out in jagged arcs, striking the nearest Guardian. Its form disintegrated briefly, then reformed, but the pulse had staggered it. Kaela shouted, "Now, move to the dais!" One by one, they sprinted, guided by the fragment's energy. Each step synchronized with the northern fragment's hum. David realized he could feel the safest route, anticipate the Guardian's attacks, and even manipulate the eastern fragment's energy to deflect strikes. The order below had reached the plateau edge, weapons raised. They fired blindly, but every bullet dissipated against the radiant energy radiating from David and the group. David reached the dais. The eastern fragment pulsed violently in his hands, and the stone beneath responded. Ancient carvings shimmered, revealing glyphs and constellations, pathways across the plateau, and hidden channels leading further into the mountains. Kaela gestured for Miguel and Graves to step onto the dais. Together, now, let the fragments guide your hearts, not your fear. They did. The northern and eastern fragments harmonized, their pulsing energy forming a protective aura around the group. The Guardians screeched, recoiling from the light, trapped in their own shadows. David stepped fully onto the central circle. The eastern fragment flared in response. Light surged upward, forming spectral images of Terra Lucida cities, constellations, and maps of fragment locations. The northern fragment pulsed in tandem, and David could hear it, whispers of ancient knowledge and instructions, warnings in future paths. The order below shouted in frustration. One operative fired directly at the dais. The bullet hit the eastern fragment's radiant shield and vaporized into sparks of light. Kaela exhaled sharply. They have no idea what they're facing. David felt power coursing through him. He could see Guardians, terrain, threats, and even safe paths for miles beyond the plateau. The fragments were fully awakened. A massive Guardian lunged at him from above. David raised the eastern fragment. A wave of light expanded outward, striking it. The shadow screeched, vaporized partially, then fell into the channels below, immobilized. Miguel whispered in awe, It's alive. It's protecting us." Kaela's eyes were fierce. "And it will keep protecting us as long as we don't falter. But the order will adapt. They'll find a way to break through." David realized the fragments were more than power. They were intelligence, strategy, guardianship, allies. And as long as they moved together, harmonized with the fragments, they could withstand anything the order threw at them. The plateau trembled, the Guardians surged, but every move David made was guided by the fragments. He anticipated attacks before they happened, directed energy waves, and steered his team along the safest path. The eastern fragment glowed brighter than ever. David could feel it resonating with the northern fragment in his pocket. Together, they formed a network of energy, linking stone, air, water, and even the shadows themselves into a protective field. Kaela hissed, "Keep moving toward the mountain's heart. That's where the next fragment awaits." David clenched the fragments. The Guardians faltered. The order below paused, stunned by the radiant shield and the group's seemingly impossible navigation. And for the first time, David understood. The eastern fragment's full power was not just protection, it was guidance, strategy, and intelligence. It chose worthy hands, amplified their skills, and could turn the tide against overwhelming odds. The trial on the plateau had begun, and for now, the order was powerless against the fragment's awakened might.
The Guardians staggered back, their smoky forms wavering under the fragment's brilliant energy. David felt the northern and eastern fragments pulsing in perfect harmony, guiding his steps toward the narrow mountain trail that led deeper into the rugged peaks. Kaela motioned sharply. "Move! The order won't hesitate forever. They'll adapt fast." David led the group down the treacherous path, each step guided by the fragments. Loose stones, hidden channels of water, and sharp drops had no effect. The energy created subtle footholds, almost invisible, that stabilized their descent. Behind them, the order regrouped. A drone hovered above, red beams slicing through the clouds. Operatives shouted commands, weapons aimed, coordination precise. But every step they took was met with frictionless resistance. David could feel the fragments subtly influencing the terrain, slowing their pursuers, nudging them into blind spots, creating micro-obstacles from rock and tree roots. Graves hissed, "This is insane. Are the fragments moving the mountain for us?" Kaela didn't answer. Her eyes were fixed ahead, scanning for natural choke points. "Just follow the path. Don't waste energy. The fragments will handle what's dangerous." They descended into a narrow gorge, cliffs pressing in on both sides. The fragments glowed brighter, guiding them around hidden pitfalls, shallow caves, and sudden water cascades. Suddenly, from above, a barrage of energy-charged net projectiles fired by the Order arced down the slope. David instinctively raised the eastern fragment. A radiant barrier extended outward, absorbing the nets mid-air and vaporizing them into harmless sparks. Miguel whispered, awestruck, "It's like the fragments know exactly what they're going to do before it happens." David nodded, feeling the rhythm of both fragments vibrating through him, anticipating, adapting, and neutralizing every threat. Kaela pointed to a narrow stone bridge over a rushing stream. "Cross quickly. Once we're on the other side, the terrain hides us from the Order's drones. Keep low." They sprinted, carefully synchronizing their steps with the fragment's pulses. The eastern fragment's glow formed a protective arc, bending light and shadow, making them nearly invisible from above. Halfway across, the Order fired again. Bullets clattered harmlessly against the fragment's radiant shield. The Guardian's spectral forms flickered alongside them, seeming to repel the Order's attacks instinctively. David felt the fragments tugging him, almost like hands guiding him. One step, 2 steps, then a sudden surge as the northern fragment resonated violently. "The path!" Kaela shouted. "Through the hidden ravine on the other side. It leads into the high forests. From there we can disappear into the mountains." They scrambled across, barely noticing the Order faltering on the unstable bridge. David realized the fragment's intelligence extended beyond protection. They actively manipulated the environment, creating obstacles and slowing enemies. On the far side, the narrow ravine narrowed into a shadowed gorge. David could feel the fragments vibrating in warning. Small rocks shifted, and roots formed makeshift barricades. The Order advanced, but the fragments guided every step, turning the gorge into a gauntlet that only the Dawn Keepers could navigate. Miguel gasped, It's like the mountain itself is fighting for us." Kaela's eyes were hard. "This is Terra Lucida's legacy. Every fragment has been hidden, protected, and trained to awaken when its bearer is ready. Right now, we're alive because we were chosen." David's pulse synchronized fully with the fragments. The eastern fragment's energy surged, forming a glowing corridor ahead. He realized it was more than a path. It was a signal, pointing toward the next fragment, whispering a direction only the worthy could perceive. Above, the Order's drones struggled to track them, their sensors distorted by the fragment's energy. Operatives shouted, scanning, moving desperately through the gorge, but every attempt to intercept them failed. Kaela finally slowed. "We've reached the forested highlands. For now, the Order cannot follow us without risking exposure, but the fragments have more to reveal." David felt the eastern fragment pulse strongly in his hands, almost like a heartbeat syncing with the northern fragment. He glimpsed images, ancient forests, rivers, and a mountain peak marked with symbols eerily similar to those on the plateau. Kaela saw it too. That's it, the third fragment. The northern and eastern fragments have illuminated its location, but it won't be easy. The path is treacherous, the Guardians relentless, and the Order more determined than ever. David clenched the fragments. "Then we have to reach it first. No mistakes, not now." The forest stretched before them, thick, dark, and full of hidden perils. Above, the wind carried faint echoes of the plateau's light. The next trial awaited, and the fragments pulsed with an intensity David had never felt before. The forested highlands rose steeply ahead, dense with pine and fir, shadows stretching across the narrow mountain paths. David, Kaela, Graves, and Miguel moved carefully, fragments pulsing in tandem, illuminating safe footing and guiding them through the rugged terrain. Every step felt alive. The northern fragment hummed, the eastern fragment glowed brighter, and together they seemed to communicate a path forward, an invisible trail that only the worthy could follow. Miguel whispered, voice trembling, "I don't even know how the fragments know all this." Kaela's eyes scanned the tree line. They were created to protect knowledge and power, to awaken only when the rightful bearer arrives. Every step, every guardian, every trap, they've been anticipating us for centuries. Suddenly, the ground trembled beneath their feet. Small stones slid from the cliffs, narrowly missing them. David froze. The fragments pulsed violently, their glow intensifying. A voice, or perhaps a memory, echoed faintly in his mind. Approach the peak, but beware the eyes of the third guardian. Ahead, a clearing opened. On the cliff above, a massive stone formation twisted unnaturally, shadowed and almost humanoid in shape. Its eyes, deep hollows glowing faintly, followed their movements. Kaela hissed, "That's the first of the third fragment's guardians. Not just stone, it's alive." David felt the fragments resonate in warning. The northern fragment hummed like a heartbeat, steady but insistent. The eastern fragment vibrated sharply like it was responding to a threat. The guardian moved, not with legs, but with the slow, deliberate ripple of stone and shadow. Each step shifted the terrain, dislodging boulders, revealing hidden pits, and triggering narrow ledges to tilt. Graves whispered harshly, "It's huge. We're not just running, we're navigating a living trap." Kaela nodded, "Exactly, and it will test the fragments and us to see if we're worthy of the third fragment's guidance." David stepped forward cautiously, fragments glowing. The northern fragment pulsed, highlighting safe footing across the treacherous cliffside. The eastern fragment extended a radiant arc, deflecting falling rocks and stabilizing narrow ledges. The guardian lunged. Shadows coiled around its massive form, striking toward them. David raised the eastern fragment. Energy arcs erupted, smashing the incoming shadows, creating a protective barrier just wide enough for the group to advance. Miguel gasped, It's fighting for us again." Kaela pressed forward. "Yes, but it's testing our resolve. We must prove we're not just surviving. We must understand the fragments." The guardian shifted, and a series of stone plates along the cliff face dropped, revealing spikes beneath. David froze for a moment, then instinctively followed the pulse of the northern fragment, stepping precisely on the safe spots it illuminated. The eastern fragment flared, reinforcing the path, and the group passed unscathed. The order appeared at the far edge of the clearing, weapons raised. They'd tracked them this far, but the terrain was now actively working against them. Rocks shifted underfoot, pits opened, and spectral barriers deflected bullets. Kaela muttered, "They're walking straight into the Guardian's trap." David saw it too. The order had advanced blindly into a narrow canyon ahead. The fragments pulsed violently, warning of the danger. With a wave of the eastern fragment, energy surged across the canyon. Boulders shifted, and a controlled avalanche began. The order scrambled, retreating, unable to proceed without injury. Their advance was halted, not by human hands, but by the fragments and the living guardians of Terra Lucida. Miguel whispered, awestruck, "It's like the mountain itself is alive, defending the fragments." Kaela nodded, "And it is. The third fragment doesn't just hide in the mountains, it commands them, tests those who seek it, and only reveals itself to the worthy." David clenched both fragments tightly. Ahead, the guardian paused,
then slowly moved aside, leaving a narrow trail leading higher into the peaks. Kaela turned to him. That trail leads to the third fragment, but the dangers increase exponentially from here. Every step, every decision, it's a trial. David felt the fragments pulsing in anticipation. The mountain's energy, the guardians, and even the treacherous terrain seemed to hum in unison. Above them, the clouds thickened, wind whipping across the peaks. The third fragment awaited, its guardians awake, its power testing every move, and the Order, still alive, was now trapped in a deadly canyon below, unaware of the storm building above. The next leg of their journey had begun.
The trail narrowed as the high peaks loomed above. David, Kaela, Graves, and Miguel moved with extreme caution, fragments pulsing like living hearts in their hands. Every step was guided. Every vibration from the stone beneath their feet communicated a silent warning. Kaela whispered, "The third fragment doesn't just guard itself. It awakens the environment, the guardians, and even tests us. One mistake and we won't survive." David nodded, feeling the hum of both fragments synchronizing, almost like a pulse between his own heartbeat and the mountain. The northern fragment in his pocket vibrated steadily, while the eastern fragment's light flared brighter with each treacherous step. A sudden roar echoed from above. The first of the third fragment's guardians moved ahead, larger and more fluid than before. Its shadow stretched across the jagged cliff face, eyes glowing faintly like molten stone. Miguel gasped, "It's massive!" Kaela's expression hardened. "And it will test every ounce of our focus. The third fragment only awakens fully when the trial is past." They climbed carefully along the cliffside, the fragments guiding them to stable footholds. Rocks shifted underfoot, gusts of wind threatened to throw them off balance, and the guardian's presence warped the mountain, creating sudden drops and hidden pitfalls. David raised the eastern fragment instinctively. A radiant arc extended outward, stabilizing loose stones, repelling sudden blasts of wind, and illuminating the safest path. The northern fragment vibrated in confirmation, a silent reassurance that they were moving correctly. Halfway up, the guardian lunged, its massive arms swung toward them, rocks and debris cascading. David reacted instantly, raising the eastern fragment. Energy surged outward, forming a radiant barrier. The debris was deflected, forming a glowing curtain that protected the group as they continued upward. Graves muttered, awestruck, "It's like a force of nature, but smarter." David felt the fragments resonate with the mountain itself. Every pulse revealed subtle hazards, a weak ledge, a slippery slope, a concealed chasm. The fragments were teaching him, guiding him, and even manipulating reality just enough to give them a chance. At last they reached a plateau near the peak. The wind roared, carrying the scent of snow and stone. In the center, a circular dais of pure granite shimmered faintly. Symbols etched into its surface glowed in response to the fragments. Kaela whispered, "This is it. The third fragment awaits, but it will not be passive. It will test not just your skill, but your will." David stepped onto the dais. The eastern fragment flared violently, and the northern fragment hummed in harmony. The mountain trembled slightly. From the surrounding peaks, spectral guardians emerged, taller, more fluid, and more intimidating than any they had faced before. Miguel gasped, "It's massive." Kaela's expression hardened, "And it will test every ounce of our focus. The third fragment only awakens fully when the trial is past." David raised the eastern fragment high. Light shot upward, striking the center of the dais. The guardians hesitated, recoiling as a surge of energy spread across the plateau. Symbols on the stone glowed brighter, aligning with the fragment's pulse.
The third fragment began to reveal itself, its energy radiating outward, interacting with the northern and eastern fragments. David felt a wave of knowledge and power flow into him. Images of ancient Terra Lucida cities, maps, and hidden fragment locations flashing in his mind. The Guardians advanced again, but now, guided by the fragment's intelligence, David anticipated every movement. He extended the eastern fragment in sweeping arcs, deflecting shadows, manipulating terrain, and even guiding his team's movements with perfect precision. Graves gasped, "It's controlling everything!" The wind swirled violently, but the fragments stabilized their footing, illuminating hidden safe zones and neutralizing hazards. The Guardians faltered, unable to penetrate the radiant energy. David realized the third fragment's true power. It did not just protect, it amplified, guided, and integrated the bearer's intent with the environment. The three fragments together formed a network of intelligence, strategy, and energy that no human force could challenge. Kaela's voice cut through the roar of wind and stone. "This is only the beginning. The Order may still pursue us, but with the fragments awakened, we can now shape the battlefield, anticipate their moves, and secure the next stage of the journey." David clenched the fragments. Light radiated outward. The Guardians paused, and the wind seemed to bow around them. Above, in the distant peaks, the final fragment's resting place awaited, and the Order, still blind to the awakened power before them, would soon realize they were facing not just fugitives, but living conduits of Terra Lucida's legacy. The wind howled across the peak, carrying the scent of snow and stone, as David, Kaela, Graves, and Miguel stood on the circular dais. The three fragments, northern, eastern, and now partially awakened, resonating in perfect harmony. Below, the Order had finally reached the plateau's base. Their figures were tiny, but their intent was unmistakable. They would take the fragments at any cost. Kaela's eyes narrowed. They still don't understand what they're facing. They think these are just tools, weapons, objects of power. They don't realize the fragments are intelligence, guardians, and judgment. David could feel the northern fragment pulsing against his chest, the eastern fragment blazing in his hands, and the third fragment's energy weaving into the network like a conductor joining a symphony. The plateau itself seemed to respond, stones shifting subtly to create barriers, paths, and choke points. From the cliffs, the Order opened fire. Bullets struck the stone beneath their feet, only to ricochet harmlessly, deflected by the fragment's radiant energy. Graves muttered, astonished, "I don't even know what's happening anymore. It's like the mountain is alive." The first wave of the Order advanced through the treacherous terrain, unaware that every move was predicted and countered by the fragments. David extended the eastern fragment outward, and waves of radiant energy surged down the slopes, dislodging boulders and forming energy barriers. Operatives scrambled, bullets dissipating harmlessly against the glowing shields. Kaela moved beside David, blade in hand. "Remember, this isn't just defense. The fragments can shape the battlefield, guide our movement, control the terrain." The third fragment pulsed violently. David could feel it flooding his mind with knowledge. The Order's positions, hidden traps, and even the likely next move of each operative. Every guardian, every boulder, every gust of wind became a weapon under their control. David's pulse synchronized with the fragment's rhythm. He lifted the eastern fragment high. Beams of energy shot out across the plateau, striking the approaching Order. Spectral guardians materialized around the intruders, forcing them back. The fragment's combined power controlled gravity subtly, redirecting momentum and ensuring no operative could reach them without navigating impossible terrain. Miguel gasped.
It's like the fragments are thinking for us, controlling everything. David realized something deeper. The fragments didn't just protect, they judged, they guided, and they rewarded worthiness. Those who sought them with greed or malice were repelled, while the chosen could wield their intelligence and power. Kaela's voice cut sharply. The fragments' purpose was never to be hoarded. Terra Lucida created them to preserve knowledge, to guide humanity, to prevent destruction. They were the stewards of civilizations long before ours. David felt the fragments pulsing in resonance, their light intertwining like threads in a web. Knowledge poured into him, histories of Terra Lucida, its rise and catastrophic fall, the misuse of power that had destroyed civilizations, and the intended path for humanity if the fragments were kept safe and used wisely. A massive guardian emerged from the shadows of the plateau, a fusion of stone, shadow, and energy. Its eyes glowed molten. It lunged toward them faster than any guardian before. David raised both the northern and eastern fragments. Light surged outward, striking the guardian. The third fragment's energy joined the network, amplifying the barrier and neutralizing the attack. The guardian's momentum faltered. It staggered, recognizing the bearer's worthiness. Kaela shouted over the roar of wind and stone. "This is it! With all three fragments awake, we control not just defense, we control the battlefield, the guardians, and the path to the final fragment." The Order's forces were pinned. Every approach they attempted was anticipated, every path blocked or redirected by the fragments. Rocks shifted, wind whipped, and spectral guardians struck with precision, repelling the intruders. David felt a profound clarity. The fragment's ultimate purpose was not domination or warfare. It was guidance, protection, and judgment. They chose the worthy to carry knowledge forward, to prevent the mistakes of the past, and to shape the future responsibly. The Order's desperate shouts echoed across the plateau, but the fragment's light was absolute. They were no longer mere objects. They were intelligence, strategy, and guardianship incarnate. David lifted the eastern fragment high. All three pulsed in perfect resonance. The guardians froze, the Order stumbled, and the plateau shone like a beacon of pure power and knowledge. Kaela's eyes met David's. "This is only the beginning. The fragments have awakened, the Order is neutralized for now, and the final path is revealed. Terra Lucida's legacy is in our hands. Humanity's future is ours to protect." The wind carried the hum of the three fragments across the peaks. The mountain seemed alive, responding, acknowledging. The trial was complete. The fragments had awakened fully. And the journey, the war, the protection, the stewardship of Terra Lucida's knowledge was only just beginning.
The wind tore across the high peaks, carrying dust, snow, and the distant echoes of the Order's frustrated shouts. David, Kaela, Graves, and Miguel stood on the plateau, the three awakened fragments resonating like hearts of light, illuminating every ridge, every cliff, every guardian. Kaela's voice was calm but firm. "The final fragment rests at the heart of the mountain, but it will not be taken lightly. Its guardians are ancient, and its trial unlike anything we've faced." David clenched the fragments in his hands. He could feel their combined intelligence guiding him, the safest paths, hidden dangers, the guardians' patterns. Every step, every movement, every choice was synchronized with the fragment's pulse. Suddenly, the wind shifted. From the deepest crevice of the peak, the last guardian emerged. A towering figure of stone, shadow, and radiant light, eyes blazing like molten cores. Its form shimmered, almost intangible, but David could feel its presence, powerful, ancient, judging. Miguel whispered, trembling, That thing is huge." Kaela drew her blade. "It's the final sentinel. It tests not just our skill, but our worthiness, our judgment, our intent. If we fail, the fragments will reject us, and the order could take control." David raised the eastern fragment. Its light shot outward, merging with the northern fragment in his pocket, and the third fragment's energy. The Guardian recoiled slightly, sensing the combined resonance. The Order, now regrouped, attempted a final assault, climbing toward the plateau. But the fragment's intelligence anticipated every move. Rocks shifted to block their ascent. Spectral guardians intervened, and energy barriers deflected projectiles. The Order was trapped, forced to retreat. David felt a surge of understanding. The fragments were more than guardians. They were judgment incarnate. They responded not to force, but to intent, to courage, to wisdom. The final guardian advanced. David focused, synchronizing his pulse with the fragments. The northern fragment vibrated, the eastern fragment glowed, and the third fragment radiated a networked energy that wove reality itself into a path. David extended the eastern fragment toward the sentinel. Beams of radiant energy shot forward, interfacing with the guardian. It paused, its molten eyes scanning, judging, and then slowly it lowered its massive form, stone and shadow bending to acknowledge him. Kaela stepped forward. "The fragments recognize us as worthy. The final trial is complete, if we can reach the center." The dais at the heart of the mountain began to glow. Ancient symbols shimmered, mapping centuries of Terra Lucida's rise and fall. Images of civilizations, knowledge, and technology that predated humanity flashed before David's eyes. The Order attempted one final charge, but the fragments' combined energy formed a protective dome. Spectral guardians struck, the terrain shifted, and every path to the center was blocked. They could not reach the trio of bearers. David, heart pounding, stepped onto the dais. The three fragments pulsed in perfect harmony. Energy surged around him, and then the full truth of Terra Lucida revealed itself. Terra Lucida was never just a civilization. It was a network of intelligence, guardians, and knowledge keepers designed to prevent the collapse of civilizations through misuse of power. The fragments were its lifeblood, distributed across the world to awaken only when worthy bearers emerged. The final fragment's light merged with the others. David felt memories, strategies, and warnings flooding into him. He saw the mistakes of the past, the paths of the Order, and the potential futures humanity could take, destruction or redemption. Kaela placed her hand on his shoulder. "The fragments do not give power indiscriminately. They give responsibility, stewardship, wisdom. That is their purpose, and ours now." David nodded, feeling the weight of history and destiny. The Order lay neutralized, the fragments fully awakened, and the mountain itself seemed alive, its guardians calm but watchful. The light of the fragments pulsed like a heartbeat across the peaks, casting long shadows into the valleys below. The age of Terra Lucida's guardians had returned, not as conquerors, but as protectors, guiding the world through the choices of those worthy to carry its knowledge. David exhaled, the fragment's hum vibrating through his chest. "We've done it, but this is just the beginning. Kaela smiled faintly, eyes fierce. Yes, the fragments are awake. Humanity's path has been revealed, and now it is up to us to guide it wisely. The wind swept across the peaks. The Order had been defeated. The Guardians had recognized their worth, and the fragments, fully awakened, hummed with the knowledge and judgment of a civilization older than time itself. The journey was over. The legacy of Terra Lucida had begun anew.